You're watching election night coverage on WQAD News 8.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for our live election night coverage streaming here on the WQAD 8+ app.
Yeah, we have so much to get to tonight. But before we dive in, we want to give you a sense of what you can expect tonight.
Exactly. We will live with you here for the next 2.5 hours. We'll be checking in on the 2 congressional races in our area, and we'll have election analysis.
And most importantly, we'll be tracking the results as they come in. Of course, they have been coming in really probably for the past hour or so, I would say. Obviously, some races have already been called. We'll get to that, of course, in just a little bit.
But for right now, we are turning to Jenna Webster in studio with us tonight, tracking the race for president and the races for Iowa's 1st and Illinois' 17th congressional districts.
Yeah, but it is still very early in the evening, right, Jenna?
Here right now, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, I believe Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee were all just called for Donald Trump in the seconds that we were standing here. Illinois about 30 minutes ago was called for Kamala Harris, as we expected it to there. So let's go over to our 17th district. We are starting to get a few results in here. I'll scroll down so you can see. In Tazewell, Joe McGraw is leading there, but you can see only 2% of the vote has been counted. Tazewell County is a place that Esther Joy King won in 2022 when she was up against Eric Sorenson. The one interesting thing right now is that Eric Sorenson is taking a bit of an early lead in Fulton County, which is a place where he lost by 12 points in 2022. Again, only 2% of the vote has been counted there. Still a long way to go. We've got Whitehead County, where McGraw is in the lead by about 60%. Again, a county that Eric Sorenson lost in 2022. The majority of his votes are going to be coming from Rock Island County, McLean County, where you have Bloomington Normal. We don't have any data from there, even though it says 3% of the vote has been counted. Another good chunk of his vote is going to come from here in Peoria County. And then, of course, up in Winnebago County, where Rockford is, where Joe McGraw is actually from. So it'll be interesting to see how Joe McGraw plays there. Winnebago County did lean a little bit more Republican in that 2022 congressional race, but in a midterm election versus a presidential election, turnout very different. Again, we don't have any data right now in our Iowa 1st District polls. They are literally just closing as we speak, so it'll be a little bit before we have data there. As soon as we do, I'll give you guys an update.
Team coverage of the congressional races in our area. Maddie Franz is in Riverside, Iowa with Congresswoman Marinette Miller Meek's campaign. Harrison Belsanti is in Iowa City with her challenger, Christina Bohannan. And Joe Habersham is in Moline with Congressman Eric Sorenson's campaign. And that's where we start tonight. Joe, you've had your eye really on this race for several weeks now.
Yeah, that's right, John. And as you can see right now, I mean, the jacket's off because I'm out here talking to as many people as I can. The biggest thing that people are saying right now, or the biggest concern, has been abortion rights. Now, I have my notes out here, and I want to make sure that I get this one quote as best as I can. A woman that I talked to said, if you're going to separate church and state, you need to separate government and doctors. And that's one of the biggest reasons why people are out here supporting Eric Sorenson. He's out here advocating for women's rights. He's been in favor of codifying Roe v. Wade since, I mean, it was overturned, and he's really trying to establish a nationwide abortion standard. That's one of the reasons. And another one that people have mentioned to me, his Stop Games Act. He's out here trying to reduce the cost of drugs, medications, by reducing the number of application delays that people will end up having to run into for these generic drugs. But people have been so much favor of this man. The campaign says they feel very confident about what's going on tonight. You know, the poll is closed at 7. Nothing we don't have in right now at the moment, but they feel very good and very strong about what's going on.
Joe, I know that you don't have all of the big maps that we do back here in the studio, but I'm looking just off to my side over here. We can see with 3% reporting in Illinois' 17th district, Joe McGraw is leading. Again, that's only about 8,000 votes, give or take, that have been counted so far. Has anyone there at the campaign, are they watching these numbers right now?
Yeah, I talked to one of his campaign managers, and they're saying, look, they've been to all the 14 counties in the area. They say, look, we feel very strong. Numbers are coming in. They're coming in as we get them. But they feel very strongly about where they're at right now. They said it's still very, very, very early. I mean, look, we're still in the first hours since polls have closed. So, you know, it's going to take some time before we really get a lot of numbers back in. They feel pretty good, though.
So have you seen Eric Sorenson yet? Has he showed out and started talking to people?
You know what? I'm happy you asked. He is here. We've seen him talking. We tried to get a word from him. But, you know, he's a busy man at one of these things. Everybody's pulling his ear one way or another. But he is here. He's out here talking to people. And yeah, he's a man of the people. He's mingling with the crowd. So we'll get some more word from him later on tonight once we have a better feeling about what's going on.
All right, Joe, we are looking forward to that. We will definitely be checking back in with you in just a little bit. Of course, we are also keeping an eye on McGraw's campaign. His watch party is in Rockford tonight. We want to give you a live look from that event from one of our affiliates there. Of course, we'll be monitoring this race and the progress there. And of course, if we hear from McGraw at some point, let's say there is a speech given or something like that, we'll hopefully have access to it. We're going to bring that to you as well, even though we don't necessarily at this point have a reporter there at that watch party.
Absolutely. And in Iowa, the big race we are watching is the race of Iowa's 1st Congressional District.
Yeah, Maddie Franz is live for us tonight in Riverside, Iowa with Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks. Good evening, Maddie.
Hey, good evening, John and Shelby. So I'm at the Riverside Casino, and that's just south of Iowa City. And this is where Representative Marionette Miller Meeks is having her election party. You can see everything is all set up. Now, doors just opened a few minutes ago, so people are still kind of trickling in. We're waiting to see some more people, but their eyes are glued to these national election screens. Now, all day, Miller Meeks has been making her final pitch to voters across the district. She has been driving a lot today. So she started at a bakery in Tipton, and then she went clear across the district to Fairfield for lunch, and then she went clear back across the district to do some door knocking in Pella. Now, this is a very close race that Miller Meeks is running. You've probably seen a lot of ads coming from both sides. Now, that's thanks to the millions of dollars that are coming from super PACs. And according to Ad Impact, which is an advertisement analysis company, they estimate nearly $24 million have been spent on those ads. Now, we don't know exactly when the Congresswoman will be here. She is coming from Pella, which is about an hour-and-a-half drive from here, but we'll be here to catch her speech and any other updates here at the party.
And Maddie, have you got a chance to speak to her campaign at all, just about how they're feeling on a night like this? Because this essentially would be the third race in a row in 6 years, essentially, that has been relatively close.
You know, we haven't spoken to the campaign directly tonight. They've been very busy setting everything up, getting everything in order. But, you know, in a statement released earlier today, they said they were very confident. And the Congresswoman was on Fox and Friends this morning, and she's saying, you know, despite that Seltzer poll that came out last week showing Bohannan with the lead, she's feeling really confident going into this race, and she's expecting a good night tonight.
All right, Maddie. No surprise that she has been all across the district. She always kind of sort of bills herself as a workhorse and someone who does not stop no matter what.
Absolutely. Miller Meeks, of course, running against Democratic challenger Christina Bohannan. Harrison Belsanti is in Iowa City tonight, where Bohannan is looking to unseat Miller Meeks this time around. Of course, she ran against her 2 years ago. Good evening, Harrison.
Yeah, good evening, guys. Tonight we're in Iowa City at the Bohannan election night party, and as you can see, there's quite a turnout here. People are watching the national broadcasts here on TV, seeing which states have been called for Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. However, we're tracking the political rematch in Iowa's 1st Congressional District. Bohannan spent the day today talking with many students throughout the district, encouraging them to go out and vote. Democrats nationally are hoping to flip this swing district. A new survey from the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee shows Bohannan leads Meeks by 4 points in the district, 50 to 46%. A separate poll back in August showed the candidates in a dead heat, signaling a possible surge in support for the Democratic candidate. We talked with Bohannan supporters at tonight's event, and many say women's reproductive health care and the issue of abortion rights are major factors in their voting decision. We talked with one supporter who's hopeful for a Bohannan victory.
I think Christina is fantastic. She is brilliant. She is energetic. She has wonderful job experience for the job. And I just think she laps rings around Miller Meeks. I think she'll go far, even in national politics.
We'll continue to bring you the latest updates here from Iowa City tonight. But for now, though, I'll go ahead and send things back to you guys in the studio.
All right. Thank you so much, Harrison.
And we can't forget Nicholas Gluba. He is the Libertarian running in this race. Now, we checked in with him this evening. He told us his campaign is not having a watch party tonight.
Now, we saw a lot of focus on abortion rights and the economy from other candidates. Gluba was clear his priority was his anti-war stance. Voters, however, did not see his name on the ballot. Gluba ended up having to run a write-in campaign after his party was challenged over how it selected delegates and elected candidates. But all of this could end up having a big impact on this race. So to talk about that, let's bring in Augustana political science professor Dr. Paul Baumgartner. So much to look at tonight, but let's start here with Gluba. Can you talk about what it means to have his name off of the ballot now, and does that help either Miller Meeks or Bohannan?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in recent elections, there's been a remarkable amount of fighting, both from Republican camps and Democratic camps, trying to ensure that third-party candidates and third parties are kept off the ballot. Right? And once again, this is not a one-party story. Republicans have done this and Democrats have done this as well. We should also be clear about just the magnitude of this political phenomenon. So nationwide, both the Republicans and the Democrats have spent millions of dollars in recent years ensuring that candidates like a Cornel West or a Jill Stein are kept off the ballot. But although a lot of attention is focused on these third-party candidates on the presidential ticket, you're right, it has a big impact when it comes to races closer to home, like congressional races, or even statewide races like a state house seat or a state senate seat. Now, when it comes to a Libertarian Party candidate, it's not always clear where their votes will go, or to put it slightly differently, it's not clear who they're taking from. Right? There are times in which the Republican Party believes that the Libertarian candidate is harming them, but also if it's an issue such as abortion, maybe it's the Democratic candidate that is actually being harmed by the Libertarian on the ballot.
When we talked to Gluba, he made it seem as he thought he was going to be taking votes from the Republican candidate, from Miller Meeks, because he described sort of the Libertarian Party as perhaps appealing more to perhaps fiscal conservatives who are trying to kind of figure out who they want to vote for.
That's completely understandable. Now, we should be clear that there's been some shifts as it relates to economic policy between the Republican and Democratic parties over the past few years. If you were to tell me even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that the Republican candidate for president was going to be railing against NAFTA and free trade agreements and advocating for mass tariffs, and had union leaders that were offering support for his candidacy, I would have been absolutely shocked. At the same time, the Democratic candidate for president has garnered support from crypto billionaires and has famous billionaires like Mark Cuban in her camp. So fiscal conservatism as kind of a key pillar of either party seems to be actually a bit nebulous right now in a way that it might not have been just a few years back.
You bringing that up, Paul, makes me think of Elon Musk and Trump right now. But I wanted to ask you, what other patterns do you watch for, or are you already noticing when it comes to split tickets versus straight tickets?
Yes, that's a great question. It's something that political scientists have been very interested in recent election cycles. It used to be very common to see split ticket voting in the United States, right? You'd have someone go into the ballot booth and say, I love my Republican governor, but I'm definitely going to vote for the Democratic president, right? That was very commonplace in the United States. In recent election cycles, it's become less common, right? Now, in this election, I think it's going to be really important that we watch where it happens, when it happens, right? So just over the past few minutes, I've been looking at the numbers coming out of Iowa, right? So right now, the vice presidential nominee for the Republican Party, J.D. Vance, is a sitting U.S. senator from Ohio, right? Ohio has been called for Donald Trump already. But one of the senators who is in a fight for his life right now is Sherrod Brown, a Democrat, right? So Sherrod Brown is trying very hard to kind of buck the trend within his state, right? So even as the state seems to be moving rightward, he's trying to ensure that this seat is not lost to the Republican Party. Now, the United States Senate is going to be close. I mean, many people are watching to see what happens in races like the Ohio race. Is Sherrod Brown, the incumbent, going to be able to protect his seat, right? Similarly, in Montana, it's almost guaranteed that Donald Trump is going to win the state of Montana. But what happens to a Democratic senator like John Tester, right? So each party is hoping for split ticket voting that benefits them. We'll see if any of these prayers get answered tonight.
And what so far, as you've watched these numbers come in, has surprised you the most?
So there's always going to be higher turnout in a presidential election cycle than in a midterm cycle, right? People are voting for the president, they're voting for senators and members of the House, but they're also voting for ballot measures, right? Things like referenda and initiatives. So even over the past few minutes, we've seen reporters comment about the importance of abortion rights for several of the candidates in these local races. Well, there are multiple ballot measures across the U.S. right now that are being voted on pertaining to abortion. And the most recent data that I'm looking at shows that in the state of Florida, one of the largest states in the United States, that the measure to protect abortion rights in the state is going to fail, right? So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for when it comes to referenda and initiatives. We're going to see a similar referenda coming up in Arizona tonight. Is that going to fail as well? So Florida went for Donald Trump, and we also will see this abortion access initiative fall. Is Arizona going to go for Trump? What does that mean for the abortion measure that's on offer there? Those are the kind of things that we'll be looking for. Now, if I just want to add one tidbit, Florida, wow. I mean, this is one of those states that not so long ago was kind of the preeminent battleground state, right? And this is something that we should not forget, that battleground states can change sometimes quite rapidly. The state has already been called for Donald Trump. It is a pretty dyed-in-the-wool Republican state now. Just a few election cycles ago, it's razor thin. Who's going to win it, the Republican or the Democrat? Not so much the case nowadays.
Paul, thank you so much for your insight. We'll make sure to check in with you later on tonight. But for right now, millions have already casted their ballot early. In-person voting for the presidential election is still underway, though, in a number of states, and the closing times for polling locations vary across the country. Polls in most of Indiana and Kentucky closed at 5 p.m. Central Time, and then closings come in waves depending on the state and location, so always be sure to double-check local guidelines before you plan to head to the polls. Of course, you can see a full state-by-state guide of voting times on our website. And
national polls are have been trying to piece together who's had an edge in this presidential race. One predictor might come from the most northwestern county in the lower 48.
We are, of course, talking about Clallam County in Washington state. It's what's called a bellwether county because since 1920, get this, its voters have picked the winning candidate for president in all but 2 races.
Now, if the election was a coin toss, Clallam County won it 23 out of 25 times. The chance of that, it's 1 in 100,000.
Of course, Clallam County is the last bellwether in the country. Drew Andre from our sister station talked to neighbors there about its unique place in American history.
What makes this county unique?
Lots of places to find beauty here.
We have the mountains, we have the ocean, got the perfect mixture of everything you can need.
And that's why we're here.
What do you think it says about Clallam County that it's the only one in the entire country that's correctly chosen the president every cycle since 1980?
Well, I would have to say that they just have good insight.
I think that's pretty remarkable. Yeah, I'm pretty proud of it.
It's a difficult question to answer or even fathom to figure out. That's why you're here.
From Reagan to Biden,
A majority of Clallam County voters have picked the president. That's 6 Republicans, 5 Democrats. A streak unmatched by the other 3,142 counties in the U.S.
Dumbfounded and stumped as anyone else.
Hey guys.
We visited Rain Shadow Cafe in Sequim.
So it's the cheers of coffee, you know, the place where everybody knows your name.
Not quite a red city, not quite a blue one.
And you certainly see signs equally for everyone.
A town that votes like the color of its favorite flower. Why do you think this area is this moderate melting pot?
Well, we have people here from a lot of places.
We have a lot of retirees here in Sequim.
But there's still those blue-collar roots.
Clallam County was built on the marine industry in Port Angeles, agriculture in Sequim, and logging in Forks.
You know, this was some of the largest timber in the country. It was out here on the Olympic Peninsula.
The archives at the North Olympic History Center give us a peek inside.
Deep history, yeah.
Executive Director David Brownell says the driver of the economy here has shifted over time.
You know, this was a big mill town, and so sequentially those mills have slowly shut down. You've seen a real growth, a continued growth in tourism.
The county's biggest towns are nestled between the Olympic Mountains and the Pacific Ocean. The county skews older and poorer than the national average. It's overwhelmingly white with a higher than average Native American community and a growing Latino population.
If you kind of put things on a map, it kind of trends from kind of purple in the east end of the county out to red out west, but there's a ton of exceptions to that.
As industries have shifted, their bellwether status hasn't.
Maybe they look at those issues that they care about more than any particular candidate or party.
Voting based on values and not just necessarily political alignment.
Of the remaining 19 bellwether counties since 1980, in 2020, all but Clallam picked Trump.
That's just amazing.
What would you say is your number one issue in this election?
The economy and just the way things are going. Everything is pretty expensive right now.
For us would probably be housing.
My number one issue is women's rights.
I'm very military oriented.
Affordable housing and childcare.
The right for women to choose.
What do you think the country could learn from Clallam County?
Oh gosh.
More caring, more kind, more generous, more giving.
And understanding that even if you don't agree with the person who lives next door to you, that doesn't make them a bad person. And that there's probably a lot more that you see eye to eye on.
How to slow down and enjoy life.
And I'm trying to think of what you're trying to think. What are we going to do this year?
That's the question on everyone's mind. And the fact that no one knows is why the nation is watching Clallam County.
All right, interesting storyline there for sure. Okay, throughout the night, we will also have be live over the air every half hour for a few minutes. You'll be able to see that over the air, but also right here on the WQAD 8+ app.
Thank you for joining us, and don't go anywhere. We are going to pause for just a minute. Stay with us.
All right, we have a lot to get to tonight, but before we dive in here, of course, we want to give you an idea of what you can expect. Let me just get a sense of where we want to go with all of this right now. before we get too far ahead of ourselves.
We do know that barring a major surprise, the 7 states where the race for the White House will likely be decided are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. No surprise there. According to a social media post of the Empire State Building in New York, the lights on the iconic building will change color every single time the Associated Press decides a winner in one of these states. And we have someone right here in studio tracking all of this for us. Jenna Webster joins us live right now.
Hey guys, yeah, one of the interesting things we're seeing as results start coming in, I want to talk about Iowa for a second because there's been a lot of national attention on it after that Des Moines Register poll showed that Kamala Harris had a 3% lead within the margin of error as we're seeing some of those early tally votes come in. Obviously in Des Moines, Kamala Harris with 10% of the vote counted is leading there. Her margin there is a little bit better than Biden's were in 2020. But here's a county that I actually, when you're talking about whether or not Iowa can actually flip, this was a county that I noticed one of the very few that the margins were so much closer in 2020 for Biden and Trump. Trump only won this county by about 6 points. So this was one that I was looking at that maybe could be potentially flipped. So much more that still has to happen. We don't have any of our results right now in our 1st district. So of course we're going to be continuing to track those tonight, guys.
All right, Jenna, thank you. And along with candidate choices on your ballot, Illinois voters also saw 3 questions on statewide issues.
Now, the first one asks if a candidate appearing on the ballots for federal, state, or local office should face penalties if they interfere or attempt to interfere with an election worker's duties. It's not defined what constitutes interference with an election worker's duties, but in Illinois, it is a felony charge to tamper or interfere with voting machines.
Yeah, the next question is, should the Illinois Constitution create an additional 3% tax on incomes greater than $1 million? This adds on to the 4.95% income tax rate right now in Illinois. If increased, the profits from the tax change would be dedicated to property tax relief.
And the third asks if all assisted reproductive treatments be covered by any insurance plan in Illinois. So this would be for coverage of pregnancy benefits without limitation on the number of treatments. Essentially, this question is asking if health plans should be required to fully cover all assisted reproductive treatments without limits in Illinois. Now, these are all yes or no questions, so we want to bring in our election expert, Dr. Paul Baumgardner. Paul, first of all, what is an advisory question, and what's the goal when asking voters about them during an election?
Yeah, the state is trying to gauge interest, but also basic views of its citizens on topics to see whether or not these are topics that the state or local communities ought to be dedicating big resources to. So these sorts of kind of advisory opinions or advisory votes, maybe down the line will then become big new initiatives within a state.
All right, Professor, thank you for a little bit of insight there. Of course, we're going to join you again here in just a little bit on the News 8 Plus app, which is where we're streaming all night. Right now, of course, you're probably watching us either there or over the air. Our over-the-air coverage here at News 8 will end here in just a moment, but...
Exactly. Of course, it is just before 9 o'clock. Our next update here on TV will be at 9:24, but again, you can watch us all night long, all the way up until 10 o'clock on the free News 8 Plus app. Free to download on your Apple TV, Roku devices, or Amazon Fire TV devices.
in a lot of these places, and just bringing up these 19, 20,000, 40,000 votes in all these different counties across the state. And that's why you see now this edge beginning to emerge of 211,000 votes. Gwinnett County is going to be very important here. It's about 8-9% of the entire state. Right now, Harris up about 60-40 there with only about 16% of the vote in. We're going to look at this all night. These are where we think the votes are. Those big blue dots seem to suggest there's a lot there, but all those red dots add up as well. So there's still a good amount of Republican vote. And again,
just explain
Trump
that,
has
if you
an
will,
edge right
again
now.
for the audience looking. The size of those dots actually is proportional to the amount of vote that we believe is still outstanding.
Yeah, for every county, some of them are blue counties, some of them are red counties, some are more purple. And so if it's a 50-50 county, you're not going to get a lot of vote edge one way or the other. But this is really Atlanta and the suburbs. Some of these overlapping dots are so big because the vote share is so large in that area. Some of the smaller blue dots, all of it adds up to a lot of vote that is still out. But we're edging up to about 3/4 of the vote in, and we've seen nights like this develop where it gets harder and harder to make up a gap.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of what you just showed us shows Kamala Harris hitting her benchmark or actually surpassing it marginally, but then Donald Trump actually doing even better than what he had to do in some of these rural counties in Georgia. Ryan, what are you hearing from the Trump campaign?
I'm hearing that they're still very excited about what they're seeing. They're cautiously optimistic about North Carolina. They feel like there's not enough there for the Harris campaign to make up the ground that they need to make up. They're happy about what's happening in Ohio, that they seem to be up by 10 at this point. And historically, Ohio's been in our party sort of a mental issue where if we're not winning by 10 in Ohio, we're worried about everything else, and that number looks good. There is some, they're nervous about Pennsylvania. There's a lot of vote that's out. They know that there is a ton of early vote that hasn't even been touched. So there's no arrogance about that, but now all the attention is going to start moving to that blue wall. Virginia being tied is another issue that is getting them excited. They weren't expecting Virginia to be tied. There's 60% of the vote in, I think, about now in Virginia. The fact that that's tied and in the suburbs, Trump did not do that badly around Washington, D.C.
Could be a signal for other states. The Harris campaign not expecting to lose Virginia, but Rick, can you show us the map that gives us the proportional look at the outstanding vote in Virginia?
Yeah, and look, there's plenty of Democratic vote. This is the Washington, D.C. suburbs. This is Richmond in the area. This is Norfolk, Virginia Beach area. Lots of Democrats. Some of these, though, are lighter blue, which means it could be more of a mix. And we still have a lot of vote left from Roanoke and from other redder parts of the state. But, yeah, you add it all up, and Reince is right to point this out, because right now there is something going on where you're just not seeing the kind of numbers that you would expect in some of these suburban areas. Biden in Prince William County, 62% of the vote. Hillary Clinton, 58%. Harris is down now to 57%. So she's still winning, just not winning by the same kind of numbers. And when you balance that out with the redder parts of the state, where you see Donald Trump racking up the big numbers over and over again, that's how you get as close as it is right now in Virginia. And just, remember how close Virginia is to North Carolina and Georgia. We're talking about similar types of voters. So the fact that they're battling it out in Virginia shouldn't really be a surprise. A lot of the folks that live there are seeing some of the same media, they're seeing some of the same advertising, and they may be responding to some of the same cross pressures. Similarly, as we talk about the blue wall that Reince was mentioning in the upper Midwest, a lot of those voters have overlap as well.
Which is why Ryan says they're not getting ahead of themselves either, because Pennsylvania so far, at least at this point, looks like it has some promising signs for the Harris campaign and their effort to try to reach suburban voters, like in the collar counties around Philadelphia, which you had showed us. She seems to be doing well, and in Allegheny County as well. Well, where do those numbers stand?
Yeah, so I can show you Allegheny, which is Pittsburgh. That is just a Democratic stronghold right now. It used to be even stronger Democratic, but you've seen the numbers get a little bit higher with the last couple of elections, and with about half the vote in right now in the Pittsburgh area. Yeah, the numbers are getting hit. The 538 benchmark would suggest she's running ahead of where she needs to go. And yeah, you mentioned the Philadelphia suburbs. Still not a lot of vote in places like Chester County, but Harris is getting at least close to her numbers. Montgomery County hitting a little bit above it right now. And Bucks, I'm still watching, because that kind of margin, if that carries through the night, would be really surprising and would bode well for her chances. We're still waiting on about 3/4 of the vote in Philadelphia, which is just a monster in that state. There's so much vote out there. And as you'd expect, Harris is carrying it handily. 112,000 votes that she's getting out of the city of Philadelphia. That's almost, it's about 2/3 or 3/4 of the margin she has in the entire state right now.
Let's swing over to Rachel Scott at the other board. And Rachel, you're looking at the Senate race. I know Bob Casey looking to hold on to his seat, famous name in Pennsylvania, obviously his father in politics as well many years ago. Dave McCormick challenging him. And where does that race stand? I saw a moment ago, it looked like he was underperforming Harris in some respects, at least in Allegheny County.
Yeah, let's take a look at where it stands statewide right now. This is how we can compare how the presidential candidates are doing at the top of the ticket to the Senate candidates in this race. So you have Vice President Kamala Harris statewide, 52%, again, very early, 30% of the vote in right now. Bob Casey also at 52. You mentioned the area around Pittsburgh, Allegheny County. Let's take a look at where that stands and how these two compare here. You have Vice President Kamala Harris, 65%, Bob Casey, 65 as well. Also going to be looking at Scranton. He's from Scranton, home to President Joe Biden. You could see he's performing a little bit better than Vice President Kamala Harris here. In the final stretch, David, Bob Casey has been running ads in this state, really painting himself as an independent that bucked President Biden when it came to tariffs and also sided with former President Donald Trump. He has been trying to find the middle ground here because he is fully aware that if Vice President Kamala Harris does not do well here, it could impact his race as well.
Let's swing it out to Matt Gutman, who's on the ground in Pennsylvania. Matt, what are you hearing?
I'm hearing that it looks like Senator Casey has a very good chance here. I mean, from the beginning, Governor Josh Shapiro and others have told me that he is the most likely to win here. His father was a governor. He is the scion of a very famous family here, also from Scranton, like former President Biden. And McCormick's got a big knock against him, and that is that he hasn't really lived in the state. He lives mostly in Connecticut, and that is something that apparently has affected voters here. Now, there's another thing I want to talk about, and that is the results and the timing of the results, David. I spoke to Governor Shapiro, and he's been very adamant about accuracy being first, also the vote being safe and fair. But officials here understand that they are in a race against the clock. You remember back in 2020, it took almost 5 days to tabulate the vote here. That delta between the elections and the results left all of this space for rumor and conspiracy theory, which was jumped upon by the Trump administration. That's happening again already. But this time, they aim to do it much more quickly. They have more voting machines, although they still are not allowed to pre-process the mail-in ballots until 7 a.m. on Election Day. But the state funding that goes to the counties that's tied to their election funding stipulates that they cannot stop counting once they have started until they are completely done. So they've got rotating crews going round the clock to count the votes. Most of the counties tell me they hope to have it done at some point tomorrow afternoon. One thing to look at is Erie County. At last glance, they have about only 1% in. Officials there telling me there is massive voter turnout. And because there was a snafu with their mail-in ballots, the vendor sent them to the wrong addresses. Some people didn't get them. I was told that counting the mail-in ballots could take an additional days, possibly even weeks. So that could take a long time. And of course, Erie County is a pivotal swing county that has swung from side to side over the past several elections, David.
Yeah, one of those boomerang counters we're going to be watching very closely, Erie up in the northwestern part of Pennsylvania. Matt, thanks so much. Let's go to the wall here. You can see the 3 blue wall states right up there right now. Kamala Harris with a lead early in the night in all 3 of those states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all about the same margin, by the way, 52 to 47 Pennsylvania, a similar lead in Michigan, and with 18% of the vote in Wisconsin, 51-47. Lindsay, I know we're getting some exit poll data from voters, how independents are breaking in these so-called 3 blue wall states, or Rust Belt states as they're called.
And obviously the independent voter, highly coveted by both campaigns. It's not voting so well for Kamala Harris for those independent voters in Pennsylvania. You see 24% of those voters, pretty significant amount, about a quarter of those voters in Pennsylvania identify as independent, and they are breaking by 6 points for Donald Trump. He actually is doing 6 points better this election than he did in 2020. But Michigan and Wisconsin, a little bit more hope for the Harris campaign. She's actually leading when it comes to the independent voters by 3 points compared to Donald Trump. And Wisconsin, more of the same there, where she's leading by 4 points with the independent votes. But Donald Trump doing 5 points better with the independent voters in Wisconsin than 2020. He's doing 1 point better in Michigan when it comes to the independent voter.
Mary Bruce, this makes me think of you and your reporting these last couple of days, the Harris campaign telling you that this was going to be very close, and they said they knew that.
And that is what we are seeing here tonight. Very close, still very tight, and a long way to go. I mean, that is the message coming out of the Harris campaign tonight. I think they are encouraged and buoyed by what they are seeing in Pennsylvania. I think, you know, when it comes to Georgia, I'm hearing that they are pointing particularly to the suburban support that they're getting there. They say they are tracking slightly above expectations among suburban early voters in Georgia. They also are pointing to the rural turnout in Georgia. They say they're not seeing signs of some surging rural turnout. They, of course, are waiting for results from those larger rural counties. But look, they have said all along their most straightforward path is to win the blue wall states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. They have put a lot of energy and effort into those 3 states. But again, they always said this was going to be a tight race that was going to be won in the margins.
John?
Look, there are clearly troubling signs for Democrats throughout the Sun Belt, whether it's in the non-battleground states like Virginia or like Florida, or whether it's in the battleground states, Georgia and North Carolina. Look, anybody can still win there, but you don't see any sign that Kamala Harris is running away with anything. What I just heard from a top Democrat who is following this as close as anybody, it was always going to come down to the blue wall. Everything else is gravy. Think about what that means, David. If those are the only states that she wins in the battleground, you get to 270 electoral votes for Kamala Harris. She wins because she won a single electoral vote in one of 2 states that divides their votes, the city of Omaha in Nebraska. And that's what they're looking at right now. I mean, look, we have a long, long way to go, but that ultimately is looking more and more like the path that Kamala Harris is going to need to get elected president.
And part of that coalition, if she hopes to get to 270 tonight, includes the independent voters. I would think that seeing the way they're breaking in Pennsylvania, at least early in the preliminary exits, is not terribly encouraging, though independents, Lindsay was pointing out, Michigan and Wisconsin are breaking her way, again, according to the preliminary exit polls. And in fact, we've got some great new numbers coming in from Wisconsin that we can dig into and really see how both campaigns are doing here right after the break. Don't go away. ABC News live coverage of the presidential race continues. Wisconsin up on deck here. We're going to look at the numbers from that state in just a moment.
Coming up, we're live in the battleground zones as Election Night 2024 continues on ABC.
is on the roof, requesting backup.
2 daring rescues. Someone's got to go down there. 1 new hero.
I can do it. I'm his big brother.
If we don't try this, we might not get to him in time. 911, all new Thursday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Harris Walls, Trump Vance. Election night 2024 continues. Here again, David Muir.
Here's something to keep in mind. 4 out of the last 6 presidential elections, the state of Wisconsin was decided by less than 1 percentage point, which is why you feel like that pit in your stomach, no matter what side you're on tonight, as you look at the map coming together, a very competitive race, and it would look like, Rick, if the Harris campaign has a path to 270, it's looking more and more like it's got to be through that blue wall, the Rust Belt, and Wisconsin. Let's take a look at where those numbers stand tonight. It's funny when you think back, you know, Biden won it by, what, 21,000 votes? 4 years earlier, Donald Trump had won it by 23,000 votes. This is a state that does go back and forth. It's sort of the bellwether state of the country.
Yeah, and these are the first numbers we're seeing tonight, about a quarter of the vote in. Big caveat, we don't know exactly what vote it is. We think a lot of this is actually election day vote. We don't think we've seen any of the earlier vote from Milwaukee, which of course is the biggest city. Starting with the way the Democrats look, they have to get big numbers out of Milwaukee for starters, and that seems to be happening so far. Harris pretty close to what we think she would need to do in the city of Milwaukee to be competitive across the state, with about 40% of the vote in. Madison is just a huge vote engine for Democrats. She's getting close to that 538 benchmark, but not quite there, running a little bit below Biden's numbers from 4 years ago. But here's some big news, and hat tip to Reince Priebus, Mr. Wisconsin over there, for highlighting some of this. In Kenosha, which is a swingier part of the state, Donald Trump carried it just by 50.7% last time around. He's up 7 points. Harris down 5 points from where she was. That's significantly below the benchmark. This is one we've been looking for as well in the western part of the state, South County. Again, Harris a little below the benchmark. And up here, Door County, this is one that people love to talk about as the classic bellwether type county. Donald Trump right now a little bit up in this county. The numbers are small. We're not talking about huge counties, but as the numbers come in, we're seeing Trump continue to hit numbers. Waukesha County, which is in the suburbs there, Trump just slightly below the benchmark. A lot of vote still to go. Again, we've got less than a third of it in, and a lot of it is going to be the early vote, but it looks like it's going to be a tight race there. And you're right, David, especially if Georgia fades a little bit toward Donald Trump, and North Carolina trends there as well. That really leaves Harris with that path that you guys were just talking about, that includes Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all of which she's leading now, at least numerically.
But it's not an easy path, you know, if that's your only path. And Wisconsin, I took note of all the counties you just showed. She's almost hitting her benchmark, but Donald Trump is surpassing his benchmark. They're small counties. We're not talking about huge amounts of vote, but in every one of those counties you just showed, Donald Trump was slightly above his benchmark in each of those Wisconsin counties. Let's go to Deborah Roberts, who's on the ground in Wisconsin. Deborah, what are authorities telling you there?
Hey, David. Well, you know, once again, they're expecting that Wisconsin will keep us on the edge of our seats until late into the night, because, as you mentioned, those absentee ballots tend to come in a little bit later, and that happens in Milwaukee. They get a lot of those absentee ballots. But where I am here tonight in Madison, which is a university town, might be the one place that Harris may be able to pick up a little bit of good news, because the University of Wisconsin is here, and those young voters, those first-time voters, tell me today that they're really energized. I spent the morning at University of Wisconsin in the classroom of Professor Allison Prash. She teaches a presidential rhetoric class, and the students there told me they became more energized over the last couple of weeks because they just didn't like what they were hearing from the Trump campaign. Also, I should tell you that this particular city has just seen tremendous growth over the last few years, and a lot of those folks who have moved in here have been highly educated, blue-leaning voters. So this is becoming a much deeper blue part of the state, too. So that might cut into some of those margins that Trump might have in those red counties. So this might be the place where Harris might find a little bit of good news with those youth voters, like around the country. They've been standing in lines today, waiting to vote. So we'll see what it actually produces as the night goes on. But waiting for those absentee ballots to be processed, that is the thing that takes so long. So that will keep us sort of waiting throughout the night. But they tell us that it's moving along smoothly. They had a small snafu earlier, but it was just a small technical glitch. They think that's going to move along. So Milwaukee and, of course, Madison will probably deliver well for her. And the big question is going to be, how big, because as you said, 20,000 votes or so for Biden last time. Can she do better than that? That's what she's going to have to probably do to feel solid here in Wisconsin. David?
Deborah Roberts in Madison. Deborah, appreciate it. 28% of the vote in. Kamala Harris up by about 41,000 votes. Ryan's got about a minute before we have to hit a break here. What do you make of what you saw? I saw Donald Trump surpassing his benchmarks that he needed to ever so slightly, but in each one of those counties Rick showed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rick showed Kenosha, Wisconsin, where I grew up. That always was a Democrat town. It's where Chrysler, American Motors was. 57% is huge. He was at 50% in 2020, about 47% in 2016. The key for Wisconsin right now, though, is Madison, Dane County, that blue in the middle. If Donald Trump can stay above 24%, I think Kamala Harris is going to have a tough time. The difference in 2016 and 2020 was about 80,000 votes, which was a difference. It was 1 percentage point, and he's running 2% higher.
Right now, votes are being counted, and tomorrow, GMA is right there with the morning's first news and
breaking developments from our powerhouse political team.
Tomorrow morning,
when the story matters most.
A special edition of Good Morning America with the election coverage you need.
A detective and a waiter, partners.
Follow me.
Jeez. Solving cases, catching bad guys.
Can I place an order to go, please?
Well, close!
You're watching election night coverage on WQAD News 8.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us for our live election night coverage. Illinois and Iowa polls are both now closed. Ballots are being counted.
And your ballot includes the U.S. presidential race as well as who you want to represent you in the U.S. House of Representatives. Along with casting votes for presidential and congressional candidates, Iowa voters saw 2 statewide ballot measures. So here's what they are and what they would do.
Yeah, the first asked to amend the Iowa Constitution to prevent local governments from allowing non-citizens to vote by specifying that only a citizen of the U.S. can vote instead of every citizen of the U.S. Additionally, 17-year-old Iowans who will be 18 years old by the time of the general election would also be allowed to vote in primary elections.
Now, the second ballot measure would create a line of succession if the governor of Iowa dies, resigns, or is otherwise removed from office. So in this situation, the lieutenant governor would be able to take over and appoint a new lieutenant governor. But for right now, we're going to turn it over to Jenna Webster, who's tracking election results.
Hey guys, yeah, sticking in Iowa with our first district, we're getting some of our early results there. In these counties, only about 8% of the vote has been reported. Here in Des Moines County, which is one that Miller Meeks won in 2022, she did just take a narrow lead over Christina Bohannan there to turn that county, as of now, red. Again, only 9% of the vote counted there. Here in Jefferson County, Christina Bohannan has a lead there. That's our very purple rural county, which would be interesting to watch tonight. It's all going to come down, I think, to Scott County, where you have probably your widest range of voters, and about a third are Democrats, about a third are Republicans, and about a third are not affiliated with a party. So you're kind of looking at who is getting out those independent voters. Real quick before I let you go, we've got a look at our Illinois district. Right now, Joe McGraw has a narrow lead there. Guys.
All right, Jenna, thank you. And of course, it's just before 9 o'clock. Our next update here will be at about 9:25, but that doesn't mean our coverage stops.
That's right. Our coverage continues on our News 8 Plus app. You can join it right now on Roku, Apple TV, or Fire TV. That is free to download. We are live there for at least the next hour.
You're watching election night coverage on WQAD News 8.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for our live election night coverage streaming here on the News 8 Plus app.
Yeah, Illinois and Iowa polls are now closed. Ballots are being counted.
And your ballot includes the U.S. presidential race as well as who you want to represent you in the U.S. House of Representatives. So we're going to turn it over now to Drew Coffey. Hi, Drew.
Hey, good evening. So right here, we're outside the Scott County Administrative Center, and as you can see right behind me, law enforcement from around Scott County are beginning to collect the ballots. And I'll step out of the way so you can take a look at what's going on here. And essentially what's going on is many sheriff deputies and police officers are coming through and dropping off the SIM cards from the machines at each precinct, all 66 of them to be exact. And that has all the data and all the results and of how many people counted and their results on it. And they're dropping it off here where they're marking it on their papers. And essentially what they'll do later, they'll take those results and they'll actually take the handwritten paper ballots and they'll count them only in some precincts to make sure that the numbers are accurate. Now this comes after today to 17,000 people, over 17,000 people around Scott County voted, and from 11 to 4, over 33,000 people voted. Now here within the next hour, we'll be inside the building and we'll continue our coverage moving forward. Now back to the studio.
All right, thank you, Drew. Jenna, you are tracking the race for president and the races for Iowa 1st and Illinois 17th congressional districts.
Yeah, but it's still relatively early in the evening in some sense because there's still a lot of results we're waiting for, Jenna.
Yeah, I want to focus in on the 17th here because I know we're going out to our reporters live there next. We only have about a third of the vote that has been counted so far in the Illinois 17th. Right now, McGraw has about a less than 3% lead over Eric Sorenson. What's interesting is here up in the Rockford area, right now McGraw is winning by a pretty sizable lead there. That's a county that Eric Sorenson won by 15 points in 2022, but it was leaning a little bit more Republican, so we'll kind of keep an eye. It is a very Democratic area, so we'll see if that flips as the night goes on. We're not getting any data so far from the Bloomington Normal area. I'm not sure why that isn't populating. That is a very Democratic area for Eric Sorenson. Going into Rock Island County with a 34% of the vote. You can see it's very, very close there, which again, it was not when Eric Sorenson won in 2022. The one that was really close in 2022, where Esther Joy King, the Republican candidate, only won by about 0.9% of the vote, is McDonough County, which includes Macomb, the Western Illinois University campus. Right now, Eric Sorenson is leading in there. And of course, he's leading in Peoria County. In 2022, our turnout, about 63% was from Peoria, McLean, Rock Island, and of course up here in the Rockford area. We've got Iowa results to get to tonight, but I know we've got our Illinois reporters standing by too, guys.
As we mentioned, we have live team coverage of the congressional races in our viewing area. Maddie Franz is in Riverside, Iowa with Congresswoman Marinette Miller Meek's campaign. Harrison Belsanti is in Iowa City with her challenger, Christina Bohannan. And Joe Havisham is in Moline with Congressman Eric Sorenson. And that's where we start tonight. Joe, you have had your eye on this race for several weeks now. And of course, you've been talking to a lot of folks there at Four Brothers.
Yeah, I have. And one of the last people that we have spoken to since one of the last times that we met was Eric Sorenson's one of their campaign staffers. And he said, when I asked him what were the biggest changes from 2 years ago, back when he did win, it was like he's been able to get his face in front of a lot more people. Now, it's funny to mention that because he was our weatherman for, a better part of a decade. So he's been somebody that people are really familiar with, and that's what a lot of voters are looking for in their local officials. Most of the people that I've talked to have said that they feel like they have a personal relationship, a personal bond with Sorenson, and that's been something that he's really been able to capitalize on going into tonight. Now, as we mentioned, we have more than a quarter of the votes in, and the campaign, like I said, they feel very strongly about where they are right now. They're waiting to see what ends up happening. When you go back and look at 4 of the last 5 representatives from this district have been Democrats, and when you look back at it, all 4 or 3 of them, Lane Evans, Phil Ware, and Cherry Bustos, all the 3 Democratic candidates outside of Sorenson have all had a second term. And Eric Sorenson is hoping to make that his story tonight. Here, Joe McGraw actually leading 51% to 48%
the margin there really just a couple of thousand votes at this point.
Yeah, a lot to go though still.
Yeah, and of course we're keeping an eye on McGraw's campaign. His watch party is in Rockford tonight. This is, well, we were hoping to get you a live look. That's not a live look. But we do have cameras there. We don't have a reporter there, but we're going to monitor the progress, and hopefully if we end up hearing McGraw speak at some point throughout tonight, we're going to hopefully bring that to you.
One place we do have reporters we're in Iowa. The big race for us is the race for Iowa's 1st Congressional District.
Maddie Franz is live for us tonight in Riverside, Iowa with Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks' campaign. Good evening, Maddie.
Hey, good evening, John. Yeah, we're at the Riverside Casino and Resort. We're just south of Iowa City. Now, it's been about an hour since doors opened here. Now, people are starting to fill in at some of these tables, but the energy is pretty quiet here. Now, I did talk to a few supporters. They say that the economy is a big driver behind their decision this election. They mentioned gas and food prices are up, and that is true. One woman mentioned that she is missing those $2 gas prices back in 2020. Now, during our in-studio interview, Miller Meeks attributes that growth in prices, all that inflation, to the big spending bills from the current administration. Now, think of your Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, the CHIPS Act, and the American Rescue Plan Act. Now, we're still waiting to see the Congresswoman. She is coming from Pella, which is about an hour-and-a-half drive. That's where she was doing some door knocking in the late afternoon. So we're still waiting on word on when she'll be here, but when she is here, she'll give a speech, and we'll be sure to bring that back to you in the studio.
Maddie, it looks like things have filled out a little bit more since the last time we checked in on you. Are there a lot of people there? What are you seeing?
Yeah, there's a few dozen people. A lot of people are watching the national results on TV as they're coming in. A lot of people are chatting, just getting to know each other. A lot of the Iowa nice going on here. But yeah, it's filling out pretty okay.
All right, thanks, Maddie. Miller Meeks, of course, running against Democratic challenger Christina Bohannan. Harrison Belsanti is in Iowa City tonight, where Bohannan is looking to unseat Miller Meeks this time around. Good evening, Harrison.
Yeah, good evening, guys. Tonight we're in Iowa City at the Christina Bohannan election night party. And as you can see behind me, there's quite a turnout here. I'd say about 200 people or so are watching the national broadcast and polls here, tracking which states have been called for Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. However, we're tracking the political rematch in Iowa's 1st Congressional District. Bohannan spent the day talking with many students throughout the district, encouraging them to go out and vote. Democrats nationally are hoping to flip this swing district. A new survey from the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee shows Bohannan leads Meeks by 4 points in the district, 50 to 46%. A separate poll back in August showed the candidates in a dead heat, signaling a possible surge in support for the Democratic candidate. We talked with Bohannan supporters at tonight's event, and many say women's reproductive health care and the issue of abortion rights are major factors in their voting decision. We talked with one supporter who's hopeful for a Bohannan victory.
I think Christina is fantastic. She is brilliant. She is energetic. She has wonderful job experience for the job. And I just think she laps rings around Miller Meeks. I think she'll go far, even in national politics.
We'll continue to bring the latest updates from Iowa City tonight, and for now, I'll go ahead and send things back to you guys in the studio.
Question for you, and if you're still on here, right now there's about a 5-point difference between these two candidates in the race right now. Only 9% of precincts reporting, so not a huge number of votes coming back just yet. But both candidates knew this was a tight race. What's the confidence level amongst the folks who were there?
The confidence level is very high, John. Everybody here watching Bohannan, they're psyched for her to come out pretty soon. Like we said, through statements released all week from Bohannan's group, they're very confident in the results of this race.
All right, Harrison, thank you.
For now, though, let's bring in Augustana political science professor Dr. Paul Baumgartner. Dr. Baumgartner, we've talked a lot about how and why women voters might be motivated this election cycle, but how about young voters? Have you seen any compelling data on their turnout so far?
Yes, so in some states, we're already seeing higher turnout within the states than even in 2020. Breaking it down by age, we'll have to wait a little bit on that front. I should note that this used to be one of those shibboleths of presidential elections that one, young voters is a bit of an oxymoron because young people don't vote as often, right? If you were to look at 18 to 29-year-olds, right, that demographic just doesn't vote at the same rate as other cohorts. And also, those who do vote more left-leaning and more progressively, oftentimes for the Democratic candidate. The Republican presidential nominee, former President Trump, is actually trying to kind of break down those two norms. We've seen former President Trump trying to make inroads with young voters and low propensity voters, more so even than he did in the last presidential election. Whether or not that will be successful, especially in some of these swing states, we'll have to wait and find out. But it has been one of the big gambles by the Republican Party this election cycle.
We sort of talk about maybe that shift. I want to ask a question, but I don't want to ask too big of a question, so rein me in a little bit. When it comes to elections that perhaps signal a shift in politics, in the party, is this one of those elections or perhaps one of these periods in history where that is happening, or too early to tell?
Yes and no. On the one hand, political scientists love marking those critical elections, also known as realigning elections. Times generally once every generation, maybe every 2 generations, in which there is this kind of seismic shift, right? This tectonic shift within the electoral map and the kinds of policies that you see being put forward, the dominant governing coalitions that exist are just completely remade, right? And are remade in kind of a lasting way, right? I don't think it's likely that we're going to see that in 2024. Oftentimes this comes with a president who wins by a big margin, is also ushered in with fellow partisans in the House and the Senate around a central message. I think right now it's still so neck and neck, not just in the presidential race, but in the House race and the Senate race. The likelihood, for instance, of either party getting a filibuster-proof Senate majority is quite low. Now, that being the case, your question about whether or not we're seeing big shifts in the party, yeah, I think we are, right? But this is happening kind of at the subterranean level. If you look at the Democratic platform that came out this summer, if you look at the Republican platform that came out this summer, these platforms bear very little resemblance to what they looked like 20, 40 years ago. So there are changes internally to the party, but whether or not we're going to see a new dominant coalition emerging from this election, I'm skeptical.
Dr. Baumgartner, when we talk about patterns and looking back at previous elections, what sort of things are you looking at when you compare to 2020 and 2016? And what sort of things are you saying, this is apples and oranges, we can't really compare those two things?
Yeah, so there is one constant from 2024 back to 2020 and 2016, and that's the Republican nominee, right? He's been the nominee for 3 straight elections. We have not seen this since FDR was running for president again and again and again in the 1930s and the 1940s. However, the Democratic challenger has been different from 2016 to 2024. Now, some of the strategies that the Republican Party is trying to rely on for success tonight, some of the states that they're hoping to have greater turnout, some of the states that they think that they can kind of undercut Democratic majorities or Democratic hopes, actually looks kind of similar to their 2016 playbook. So yes, similarities, but also big differences and different candidates on the Democratic side.
Professor, one race that we have up on our screen here in the studio is the one, the presidential race in Iowa. We saw the poll come out just days before the election that said, wait a second, this might not be a sure bet for Republicans and for former President Trump. Then we began to see it kind of be red. Then it was a little bit blue tonight. Right now, President Trump is leading in the state. Obviously, still early, only about a quarter of the votes have been counted at this point. But is that sort of an interesting storyline to you?
It is. just a few months ago, we were talking about Donald Trump ascendant in the Republican caucuses in Iowa, right? This was back in the period where it was still a big question whether or not a big challenger would emerge against Donald Trump. And he really shellacked everyone within that Iowa caucus and then kind of ran away with the primaries and caucuses nationwide. And since then, the polling within the state, although somewhat sparse, has indicated that he would, if anything, be able to build on the majorities that he had in 2016 and 2020. He did very well in the state in 2016 and 2020, and it looks like there would be no reason for that to change. But we have seen some polls recently that are indicating that maybe the state will be a closer margin than it was just one election cycle ago. It is important to note that this is not one of the key battleground states that either of the two campaigns have been discussing or throwing just an ostentatious amount of money at in recent months. So this truly would be an election surprise if it stays close or even if Kamala Harris is able to squeak it out.
Dr. Baumgartner, we've talked a lot about our congressional races for the House here in this area. One thing we're not talking about is Senate races, and that's because there are no Senate races up for grabs in our area right now. But are there races across the country that you've got your eye on when it comes to the Senate?
Yes. And in fact, this has been one of the first big developments of the night, which is that the Republican Party has already flipped one Senate seat. Joe Manchin, the centrist Democratic senator who recently actually left the Democratic Party, also retired from the Senate. And that open seat has now been filled by Jim Justice, a former governor of West Virginia and a Republican. So here we have one Senate seat that's already moved from the Democratic camp to the Republican camp. So as far as control of the Senate goes, this is looking good for Republicans. They were worried about, would Ted Cruz get a big challenge? Would Sherrod Brown be able to kind of overcome Republican opposition? So far, the Senate landscape is looking good for Republicans. Obviously, a lot could change, but Ted Cruz's numbers are looking strong in Texas, and Sherrod Brown is looking weaker than expected in Ohio, and the West Virginia Senate seat has already gone over to a Republican. So Republican control of the Senate is looking more likely than it was just a few hours ago.
So much more to get to, Professor. We will get to it hopefully tonight, so please stick around because we still have quite a night to go ahead of us. But for now, we're going to switch gears here a little bit.
Absolutely. Iowa and Illinois polls are now closed. Here's a look at poll closing times across the country right now. Polls in most of Indiana and Kentucky were the first to close at 5 p.m. Central Time. Alaska and Hawaii will close at 11.
And of course, Jenna, you've had your finger on the pulse of a lot of our local counties and of course, the states across the country for the presidential race at least.
Yeah, we're going to hone it in here on Iowa's 1st district for a second because we just got some early results from Johnson County, which significantly narrowed the lead that Miller Meeks had. Now they are within, she and Christina Bohannan, within 1% of each other. Johnson County, very much a Democratic stronghold, and you also have a very large population there of the counties in the district. So you see right now, Christina Bohannan is leading with 68.4% of the vote. Again, only 22% of the vote has been counted. Clinton County is one that I'm keeping my eye on. Right now, Christina Bohannan is leading there by about 11%. And the reason why I have my eye on Clinton County was because it was one that Miller Meeks won by 16 points back in 2022, but she lost it by, let me double check that, she lost it by 9 points in 2020. So that one's kind of interesting to watch. Again, Christina Bohannan, this is our very purple rural county that we're watching. Christina Bohannan is winning there by a wide margin too. Again, only 22% of the vote has been counted. We do not have any of our results in Scott County yet, which is one we're watching very closely because of the large number of no party active registered voters. Those make up about 1/3 of the active registered voters in Scott County that we want to be watching. Who are they going to go to, Miller Meeks or Bohannan? And that was one that Miller Meeks only won by about 5 points in 2022, so we're keeping an eye on it tonight. So much more to get to tonight, but I want to turn it back over to you guys.
We know election officials are working through those counts in Scott County. That's where Drew Coffey is right now, outside of the administrative center there, where sheriffs are kind of making sure that process goes smoothly. But throughout the night, we will be live over the air every half hour for a few minutes. So, but you'll also be able to see it right here on the WQAD 8+ app.
So don't go anywhere, but we are going to pause for just a minute. Stay with us right here.
Became smaller and smaller each time he ran.
Yeah, and look, this shows really tough night it's shaping up to be for Democrats in the Senate. I mean, the Democrats talked about two seats that they thought they really had a chance, a chance to pick up. Florida, Texas, neither one of those looks good. Sherrod Brown, they thought they were going to keep. Looks like he's in real trouble. Tough for Democrats in the Senate.
All right, John, thanks. When we come back here, your local news is standing by, and we have new reporting from Donald Trump's campaign headquarters, who's with Donald Trump tonight, what they make of what they're seeing on the board so far, and then we'll focus right back on that blue wall, the Rust.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
We are part of an operation. Is this our combat operations center? We're approaching the gate. Militants came in from different directions. Nuclear reactor. So you have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag. Not a carry in it. How important is made to USA? Great work. Hi. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Ismail? David.
I'm David Muir.
I know who you are.
You
Watch
do?
you every night.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast.
Hey, good morning, America.
Good morning, America. Good morning, America.
Good morning, America.
Good morning, America.
Every day of your life.
You're watching election night coverage on WQAD News 8.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us for our live election night coverage.
The polls have been closed for an hour in Iowa and for 2 hours over in Illinois. So here's a live look at the Scott County Auditor's Office, where Drew Coffey has been live all night watching the process as those ballots come in. We're going to check back in on this in a moment, but for right now, we're going to go to Jenna Webster. What are you seeing right now, Jenna?
Yeah, talking about the Illinois 17th here for a second, because Joe McGraw had an early lead there. We've just seen in the last few minutes that Eric Sorenson has taken the lead there. I believe it's about 53% right now in his favor, 47% for Joe McGraw. We're still waiting on these results from McLean County, which is, we are expecting them to be very strong for Eric Sorenson. Another one that has just flipped up in the Rockford area is now in Eric Sorenson's favor by quite a bit. He's up by about a little over 5,000 votes there. We expected that one to turn out to be good for him there. Rock Island County, we're looking about 57% of the vote has been counted there. A little bit closer margins there, but he's still up, Eric Sorenson, by about 19 points. Joe McGraw doing very well in Tazewell County and also here in Fulton County and Knox County. Also, Mercer County, we don't have any data there to talk about. That was a county for Esther Joy King in 2022. The one that has flipped so far is McDonough County, which includes Macomb, the Western Illinois University area. Esther Joy King won that in the last congressional race against Eric Sorenson by less than 1% of the vote there. So that has been interesting to see that Eric Sorenson has a narrow lead there. Flipping over to our Iowa 1st District, because just in the last few minutes, when we got these results finally tabulated from Johnson County, again, only 26% of the vote there, but a very strong Democratic hold. Miller Meek's lead narrowed significantly there. They are now within 1% of each other. I was talking earlier about Clinton County has been a little bit of an interesting one to watch, where Christina Bohannan has about 11-point lead there, because that was one that Miller Meeks won in 2022 by 16 points, but she lost it in the 2020 race by 9 points. So that one had really flipped over. So kind of keeping an eye on this one tonight. Still no results coming in Scott County, which is going to be really one to watch. You have the highest registered active voters there and along with Johnson County, a little bit more here in Scott County. The interesting thing there, about a third of those active registered voters are Democrats, Republicans, and no party. So we'll have to see who those no party people go to tonight. Expected to be a very close race here in the 1st District, guys.
Great, thank you, Jenna. And something to mention too is that McLean County 2 years ago also was one of the last to report, so no surprise about that right now.
All right, it is just before 9:30. News 8 at 10 is coming up in about 30 minutes, but that doesn't mean our coverage stops. Actually, our coverage continues on the News 8 Plus app.
Of course, you can join us right now for live, local, commercial-free election coverage streaming on the WQAD 8 Plus app. We are live with the candidates in congressional races on both sides of the river, Illinois and Iowa, also tracking county by county results of the big races as they come in and providing analysis from our election experts. Again, our live commercial-free coverage is only streaming on the News 8 Plus app, free to download on your Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV devices.
Good morning, America. Good morning, America. Good morning, America.
Good morning, America. Good morning, America.
Every day of your life.
You're watching America's #1 streaming news. Live reporting, breaking new exclusives. Keep streaming with ABC News Live. This is an ABC News special. Election Night in America. Who will be the next president of the United States? From ABC News headquarters in New York, here again, David Muir.
Welcome back to ABC News Live Election Night coverage. 10:30 now here in the East, 7:30 in the West. We're 30 minutes away from polls closing in California, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. California, of course, with 54 electoral votes at stake. You're looking at the electoral value sort of the portion of the map, 270 to win. Let's take you to the floor and we'll show you where things stand at this hour. Kamala Harris with 91 electoral votes. Donald Trump with 201. You need 270 to win. He's picked up 19 states tonight. She's picked up 8 states in Washington, D.C. Let's get right to Trump headquarters, Palm Beach Convention Center. John Santucci, who's covered Donald Trump for us for quite some time. What's the mood there, John? And who's with Donald Trump?
Well, Dave. Well, David, you can hear the mood here at the convention center. They're going through results, and the crowd here supporting Donald Trump, very excited. Donald Trump is not here, David, at this convention center. He's over at Mar-a-Lago, where, David, I'm told he's been gathered with senior staff and family in a war room that's been set up at his club, going through results. And just in the last couple of minutes, David, he actually went into the grand ballroom at Mar-a-Lago, according to reporting from my colleague, Catherine Falders and I, where he actually went around and greeted supporters and donors that are there. Our sources tell us, David, that in addition to donors and club members, he's there with his new campaign surrogates, billionaire Elon Musk and RFK Jr. And in addition to the family, David, who's been advising and campaigning with Donald Trump, his eldest sons, Don Jr. and Eric, there with Dad tonight. Barron Trump also there, and a photo, David, that Melania Trump, the former First Lady, just tweeted in the last couple of minutes. Barron, who turned 18 this year, David, casting a vote for his father earlier today. David?
John Santucci with some color inside Trump headquarters there, Palm Beach Convention Center. John, thank you. Let's go right over to Eva Pilgrim. She's at the Kamala Harris headquarters, Howard University in Washington. Eva, what's the mood there?
They're watching the numbers as they come in right now. They are watching a speech from Angela Alsobrooks, who was just declared the winner in that Maryland Senate seat. You can see the crowd here cheering. The flags, those are American flags. Those flags back there, I just want to point out, those are college students in that back area. They're sort of pinned in back there. They've been here since very early. They got here. And they've been cheering and excited. I wish you could hear earlier. There was loud music. Everyone was dancing everywhere they are. You know, we've been speaking with the campaign as they've seen these numbers come in tonight, and they've sort of stuck with what they told us yesterday when we last spoke with them, which was the idea that this event here tonight on Howard's campus, as they watched the election results come in, was going to be an information center for them. They've been very clear with their supporters about how they expect these numbers to come in. The expectation that a lot of the red states would be reporting early and that the blue states would come in later, and to wait for those numbers to come in and for those states to report. And some of those blue states, as we all know, take a little bit longer to come in. And so this isn't an event that they thought they were going to have a result at tonight. This was an opportunity for people to come here. This was an opportunity for them to have a place to get information out, to keep people informed, to keep them, their supporters, calm as they watch these numbers come in tonight. But they are still cautiously optimistic as they wait to see exactly what unfolds here tonight, David.
All right, Eva Pilgrim at Howard University. Eva, thank you. Mary Bruce, you've been in contact with your sources at the campaign. What are they saying about the night? I gather they'll say this is the path that we knew we were.
You're watching Election Night coverage on WQAD News 8.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for our live election night coverage, streaming here only on the News 8 Plus app.
Yeah, Illinois and Iowa polls are now closed. Ballots are being counted.
We've said it all night long. Your ballot includes the U.S. presidential race as well as who you want to represent you in the U.S. House of Representatives. We're turning now to Jenna Webster, tracking the race for president and the races in Iowa's 1st and Illinois' 17th congressional districts.
Yeah, Jenna, still very early in the evening.
Yes, very early in the evening right now. Here's kind of a look at what the presidential breakdown looks like right now. Our called races: Donald Trump has 198 Electoral College votes. Kamala Harris with 112. Bouncing around the swing states for a second, Arizona has been interesting to watch tonight because look how close they are. 49.7% for Donald Trump, 49.5% for Kamala Harris. Here in Arizona, your big county that you're looking at is Maricopa County, where about 60% of the vote is going to be coming from for the state. Right now, Harris with a narrow lead there. Only 49% of the vote has been counted. Arizona is one of those states where we're not expecting to have final results there tonight. Going over to Georgia right now, your leader right now in the state with 88% of the vote counted is Donald Trump with about 51.3% of the vote. An interesting county here to watch is going to be Cobb County, because there were some issues with those absentee ballots getting in the mail a little bit late there. So they were telling people if you had an absentee ballot to go to the polls in person and vote there today. So curious how that is going to affect turnout and the voter percentage in Cobb County. Let's see, where else are we going to? Wisconsin is a state where Trump has a little bit of an early lead there. Again, very close, 49.8% to 48.7%. But when you look at the uncounted votes, there's a big chunk here in Milwaukee that have not been counted yet that will most likely be going to Kamala Harris. Looking at Michigan, your county leader, your state leader there, super close, 49.2% for Kamala Harris, 49% for Donald Trump. Your uncounted votes that you're still looking for, a lot in the Detroit region still to come tonight. They are counting only about 23% of their total vote. Still lots to watch in Michigan tonight. Going over to Wisconsin real quick, because there's a lot of talk. We like to talk about these bellwether counties, and a lot of people will talk about Door County, that they have correctly picked the president in the last 6 election cycles. Right now, with 54% of the votes counted, Donald Trump does have a little bit of a lead there. Not to say that the state is guaranteed for Donald Trump. We'll see where the night takes us over there. In Iowa, you have Donald Trump with a pretty sizable lead there with 45% of the vote counted. He has, it just went up a little bit, 55%. We're still waiting on all our results from Scott County, which will be very interesting to again see how that impacts our Iowa 1st District. And I'm going to have much more later tonight on those 1st and 17th districts in Illinois as we watch those, guys.
Yeah, Jenna, we knew it was going to be close, and that is what is happening. As we mentioned, we have live team coverage of the congressional races in our viewing area. Maddie Franz is in Riverside, Iowa with Congresswoman Marinette Miller-Meek's campaign. Harrison Belsanti is in Iowa City with her challenger, Christina Bohannan, and Joe Habersham is in Moline with Congressman Eric Sorenson. And that's where we continue our coverage tonight. Joe, you have had your eye on this race, and you've gotten a chance to speak to a number of people there, as well as the campaign.
Yeah, the most recent update that I have for you guys, we just talked to a campaign staffer, and they say that they are waiting until after 10 o'clock to give any speech of some sort, whether it's victory or concession. So this is a race that they expect to draw out for a little bit longer tonight. Now, I know that we've been keeping up with the numbers. A little more than 60% of the vote has come in. A little more than 60% of the votes have come in. And when we talked to Sorenson earlier, when we talked to his campaign, one of the things that he mentioned that he wanted to touch on, if he was to have a second term, his Stop Games Act. Now, this is something that he hopes would reduce the price of drugs and medicine for working class and for senior citizens. This would go by decreasing the number of application delays for generic drugs. And the campaign so far, like I said, they're waiting to hear a little bit more before they make any decision. And we'll have that more information for you as we get that. But right now, the mood in the air very lively, and people are, checking their phones and checking the polls as we get them. John and Shelby.
And if they're checking those phones, they're probably seeing right now that Sorenson has about a 53 to 47% lead. That's something Jenna mentioned, and which is something that we had not seen earlier in the night.
Absolutely. Over on the Iowa side, the big race for us is the race for Iowa's 1st congressional district.
Maddie Franz is live for us tonight in Riverside, Iowa with Congresswoman Marinette Miller-Meeks. Good evening, Maddie.
Hey, good evening, John. Yeah, we're at the Riverside Casino. We're just south of Iowa City. Now, the energy here is still pretty subdued. I mean, these tables are filled out pretty well, but there's still a handful of empty seats. Now, one of the most contentious issues in this election has been abortion. So Marinette Miller-Meeks, in our in-studio interview, she says that she is pro-life with exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. Now, and during her Iowa Senate tenure, she did vote accordingly, so voting for an Iowa amendment to remove the right to abortion from the Constitution. Now, this continued in the U.S. House, where she voted against a few measures to enshrine women's abortion rights. Now, she has put forward some contraception bills, such as one that was introduced in the Iowa Senate and did pass, to allow for contraceptives to be over the counter. Those are oral contraceptives taken routinely. And she has put forward a similar bill in the U.S. House, and that was not passed. Now, we are still waiting for the Congresswoman to come back to the party. Again, she was in Pella earlier this afternoon doing some door knocking. That's an hour and a half away. So we're going to get a little bit of a warning for when she's going to come up here, but we're going to be right here ready to capture that speech as soon as she comes up to that podium.
Maddie, we kind of talked about this earlier in the night, but this is Miller Meeks's third time running, or over the last 6 years she's been running for this district. Did she mention, is there anything different about the way she's approaching things this time, or is it kind of similar for her as it was in 2022?
Right. I mean, she's pretty similar to how it was last time. She's going in confidently. Now, when I asked her about all of the eyes on this race and how close that it is being predicted to be, she says she is just focusing in on her constituents, focusing in on the legislation that she has already put forward and that she plans to put forward in the future. So really, she says she is not really bothered by all of the attention that's on this race, and she's just ready to keep trucking.
All right, Maddie, thank you. Miller Meeks running against Democratic challenger Christina Bohannan. Harrison Belsanti is in Iowa City tonight, where Bohannan is looking to unseat Miller Meeks this time around after losing to her in 2022. Good evening, Harrison.
Yeah, good evening, guys. We're still waiting for Democratic candidate Christina Bohannan to make an appearance at her election party tonight here in Iowa City. The stage, as you can see, has all been set up with mics and signage for her entrance. Everybody here anxiously anticipating, about 200 or so supporters, I'd say, are anxiously anticipating for her to make a statement or a comment on the race for Iowa's 1st Congressional District. Bohannan's team says they are very confident in their odds of winning this race this time around. We'll bring you guys more updates as we learn the results, guys.
I think Christina is fantastic. She is brilliant. She is energetic. She has wonderful job experience for the job. And I just think she laps rings around Miller Meeks. I think she'll go far, even in national politics.
Now, I want to mention something really fast. This is not a race that is in our viewing area at all, but when we talk about Iowa, one of the key races for the U.S. House of Representatives was in Polk County over near Des Moines. And we can see on the Polk election site right now, with almost all but 3 of the precincts reporting, it looks like Democrat Lenon Bacam is going to win that race. The AP has not called it, but that's just what the results look like right now coming out of Polk County. We'll continue to watch that tonight. But for right now, we're going to bring in Augustana political science professor, Dr. Paul Baumgartner.
Yeah, Doctor, I want to kind of just chat about a little bit of what you saw maybe in the week to 2 weeks ahead of this election day. Anything that moved the needle for either of the presidential candidates or even our local congressional candidates?
Yes, there's always a lot of attention to closing messages, right? Because even though Americans have known Donald Trump for some time now, and Kamala Harris has been vice president of the United States for 3.5 years now, we do still have voters who said that they were undecided in the closing weeks of the election, right? Some estimates are that 10+% of people who intended to vote were still undecided in the closing weeks of the election. And the 2 candidates did have very different sorts of closing events, closing rallies, and closing messages. The Harris campaign in particular, I think, is going to be analyzed a lot. If she wins, it will be analyzed as one of the great strategies of her campaign. If she loses, right, there will be criticism that she should have gone elsewhere or should have focused on other things. The things that I think were quite striking about the Harris campaign over the last few weeks is the message largely focused on bipartisanship and trying to reach out to Republicans. If you look at the number of events that she had with Republicans or with former Republicans, people like former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, right, trying to offer fig leaf, if you will, trying to find moderate Republican voters, suburban voters, highly educated voters, affluent voters, right, and bring them over to the Harris camp. Another thing that's interesting is she really wanted to drive home the question of fitness, right? Was Donald Trump fit to be president? Did he have the character to be president? The Trump campaign, I think, doubled down on immigration and also the direction of the nation right now. A very common poll that we see repeated again and again, a very common polling question is, how do you feel about the direction of the nation? It's very open-ended. But a large number of Americans are not happy about the direction that the nation is going. And I think that the Trump campaign was trying to tap into that antipathy, that angst that many Americans have. So once again, Trump camp, immigration, concerns about the direction of the country, primarily around the economy, and the Harris camp trying to find avenues of bipartisanship, trying to bring over Republicans who still think that Donald Trump is not the kind of standard bearer that they want for their party.
Professor, abortion has become something of a lightning rod issue for Democrats. Although there are no abortion referendums on the ballot this time around in Iowa or Illinois, are you seeing this play a part here in our area?
Because of the restrictive abortion law in Iowa, you've seen Democratic candidates within the state of Iowa really draw on this. I'm thinking, for instance, of the Bohannan Miller-Meeks congressional race, which is playing out right now. I've seen the mailers, I've seen the TV ads, I've looked online at the materials that are provided by the two camps. Bohannan is really trying to drive home the fact that she's the pro-choice candidate and trying to emphasize Miller-Meeks as part of, quote unquote, part of the problem or part of the reason why Iowa has a restrictive abortion law. The hope here is that voters, even if not traditionally Democratic, will care so much about this single issue that they'll move, right? What's fascinating is that for the longest time, for decades in fact, this was the hope of the pro-life movement, that this would become a single issue that would bring people over to candidates, to causes, to a political party, even if they disagreed with a lot of things within that party, because of this one issue. The Democrats are now doing the same thing.
Professor, I know, in our business, it's easy to kind of sense that the temperature is high in a situation like this, in an election like this. We've seen arrests made, someone threatening a mass shooting if a certain candidate wins. An Illinois man was arrested for how he acted at a polling place just recently. There were bomb threats, there were burning of ballot boxes. Perhaps it's not widespread, perhaps this is not really the norm, but after today, after there is a winner in this election, whomever it might be, does all of this sort of cool off a little bit, or is there just going to be more of this, whether it is in the next few months or for the next 4 years?
It's a wonderful question. I think many Americans are holding their breath about the future of political violence within this country. Right? Even today on Election Day, we've had bomb threats across the country at polling locations. I was just following a bomb threat that occurred in Arizona today. And you're right, we've also had a presidential candidate and a former president of the United States who has been the subject of 2 assassination attempts, right? So what this means moving forward, one can hope that we can build the modes of civil discourse. We can kind of create bridges across our very intense divides such that a recourse to political violence isn't deemed necessary. But where we are at present is one that seems to be on the precipice of continued violence. And I think that there is a worry amongst many Americans that if this election is drawn out, maybe in the same way that it was in the 2000 presidential election, if this takes time, if this takes weeks, and certain camps are unhappy about the final result, that could be the match that lights a greater fire. And I hope that's not the case.
Yeah, certainly, and I appreciate your insight on that. Stick around, we'll come back to you here in just a little bit, but we want to get over to Jenna Webster, who's been tracking a lot of the results tonight. Hey, Jenna. Hey
guys, yeah, we do have some breaking news coming in that Iowa has been called for Donald Trump, bringing his total electoral college votes so far to 210. Iowa has been a focus in the national news the last couple of days since that Des Moines Register poll came out over the weekend that showed Kamala Harris leading Trump 47 to 44%. Again, that was within the 3% margin of error. Right now, with 59% of the vote cast, Trump is leading by about 14%. He won Iowa by 8% in 2022, and he won it by 9%, or excuse me, he won it by 8% in 2020 and 9% in 2016. So you think this margin might close and gap a little bit, especially because when you think of Johnson County, very much a Democratic spot, Kamala Harris will run the score up a little bit. I'm curious, as these final results come in, if it's going to be a little bit closer, more reflective of where that poll was. Of course, our reporters are all out live right now covering our 1st and 17th congressional districts in Illinois and Iowa.
Yeah, Jenna, Congressman Eric Sorenson taking the stage right now is what we understand. Let's go out live. He's in Moline tonight. Let's see
those
if
votes
he is
counted. It's important to stay up late until the counts come in officially before anybody declares a victory here tonight.
So you're not declaring victory then yet?
No, and I think what we've got to be able to do is make sure that all of those votes get counted, especially some of the paper ballots that need to be come through the machine. We need to make sure that there's eyeballs on every different one. And I think that's fair, especially in our democratic process, for both candidates to be able to sit and wait patiently, even though we want to see a decision to come in, but it's important that we let the process work itself out.
Eric, you're one of the only former weathermen who are in Congress right now. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about climate control and how you've had an impact in Congress so far?
I mean, look, this is all about the resiliency of our community, right? Our barometer of what's going on here is behind me at the Mississippi River, where we have so many of these floods followed by record drought. It is not a secret anymore to say that things are changing. It shouldn't be 65 degrees on Election Day. Right? But then it's also, how are we going to move this forward? It's going to take somebody without a background in politics, somebody who was a meteorologist, to be able to bring Republicans and Democrats to the table and say, what do we need to do next? What makes sense for everybody? And that is unique until some other district in the country elects another meteorologist.
So you mentioned by
All right, we're going to continue to follow Eric Sorenson on the ground, but for right now, we want to thank you for being here on the News 8 Plus app. News 8 at 10 is coming up in just a few minutes. Stick with us.
Term Democratic congressman and former, like Lindsay said, former NFL linebacker Colin Allred. They campaigned bitterly in the state over women's reproductive rights, the border, transgender rights. Cruz calling Allred too liberal for Texas. In the end, amidst a changing political landscape here in Texas, Ted Cruz survived the challenge just a few minutes ago. In his victory speech, Cruz specifically thanked Latino voters in this state, which he says have proven all the political prognosticators wrong.
John Quinones on the ground there in Texas. John, thank you. And look at the margin there. That's a much bigger margin than even Beto O'Rourke when he took on Ted Cruz. Came almost within 2 points of defeating Ted Cruz, Rachel.
Yeah, within 2 points, much bigger margin this time. And that is because Colin Allred really underperformed in some of the big cities. So let's take Harris County. This is home to Houston. You can see the 538 benchmark that we have has him at 58. He got 53. Let's go over to Austin. This is Travis County. 74% is what he needed to meet. 71 is where he was. David, I will tell you, Lindsay already said it, but Ted Cruz, deeply unpopular, even in his own state. He's tried to rebrand his image to be more approachable, to be more bipartisan. I don't think there's anywhere else in this country where Cancun was talking about more than in this state. You remember those images of Ted Cruz at the airport after that deadly winter storm. Colin Allred read ad after ad on that, but ultimately Ted Cruz remained victorious in this state.
Rick Klein, you're over at the big board as well. What are you seeing in some of these key battlegrounds? How's Pennsylvania looking at this ballot?
Yeah, Pennsylvania right now is still a problem for Kamala Harris. An advantage Donald Trump, 100,000 vote margin, a lot left of the vote. And some of these bubbles will tell you the story about what's left. 175,000 votes left in Philadelphia is our estimate. Another 193,000 in Delaware County, Delco, a place where Harris is winning very big. Bucks County, still a lot of votes to be counted there, 240,000. So that's what's keeping this as a competitive state right now. But we've seen the numbers shift as more of the Republican parts of the state have fallen in line for Donald Trump. It's been almost consistent across the board. Again, not the biggest counties, but places where he's been able to build on his lead consistently.
I think that's a good example. What you pulled up Perry County. Just look at the threshold, the 538 threshold of where he needs to be, and this is the story of the night. He's outperforming slightly in all these rural counties. I think we're seeing this in a number of the swing states, which is helping him to build these margins against Kamala Harris.
That's exactly right, and it adds up over time, and I think that's similar to what we've seen in Michigan, similar in Wisconsin. Michigan doesn't have a lot of vote in right now, but you're seeing some areas where Donald Trump in the past has not been that strong. This is more of a swingy type county. You can see where Joe Biden was. You see where Kamala Harris is. You see where Donald Trump was. You see where he is right now, and in many cases, it's that he's beating himself twice over. Right? This guy's been on the ballot a lot. Voters have had the opportunity to vote for him or vote against him several times now. So again, it's not the big urban areas. That's going to go pretty Democratic. And it's still possible that Harris pulls out enough of the vote in Madison and Milwaukee where we're still waiting on vote. But it becomes difficult as time goes by. And that really is the story that's developing now in North Carolina. When we look at our remaining votes, these blue dots have been getting smaller throughout the night. And when you really get into it, you're talking about 115,000 votes. Okay, that's if you win that 2-1, you start to chip away at that 145,000 vote lead. But there may not be enough of those blue dots left in a Georgia or North Carolina based on what we're seeing tonight.
All right, we're going to continue to drill down on these blue wall states with Rick Klein and Rachel Scott over at the board. We're closing in on 11 o'clock here in the east, 8 o'clock on the west. 4 more states set to close, including California with its 54 electoral votes. Your local news is next, and we'll see you just minutes from now with more numbers coming in, including the Sunbelt states. We'll be right back.
Yo, partner.
We're not partners. I'm the detective and you are the consultant. I see you brought your baby to a crime scene.
She is just spectating.
You're a single mom with 3 kids pretending to be a cop.
I am not pretending. I spot things that detectives miss. Still think my theory's flimsy?
That big brain of hers is going to help us close a lot of cases.
I'm just out here super copping.
High Potential, all new next Tuesday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Look at all these happy wedding guests.
I'm getting married.
Cap, are you crying? I'm a sucker for love. All of this is a lie. You have to help me. I need you to come with me right now. I just don't know what to do. Code Alpha.
This is all my fault. Wherever news breaks, ABC News Live Prime. We'll take you there.
Tonight, now 11 p.m. in the east.
You're watching election night coverage on WQAD News 8.
Thanks for joining us on election night. I'm John Diaz.
And I'm Shelby Kluver. We're going to take you right to the latest on the presidential race. Just minutes ago, ABC News calling Iowa for former President Trump. Now, you may remember a poll that was released just a few days ago that showed Harris with a slight lead in the state.
And earlier tonight, Illinois was called for Kamala Harris. No surprise there. Let's send it over to Jenna Webster, who is in studio tracking the race to 270. Jenna, what's the latest?
Yes, so right now we've kind of been in this holding pattern for Donald Trump. Oh, he just moved up from 210 to 214. Actually, Kamala Harris just moved up to 179 with California and Washington being called. If you were with us on our streaming app when we were talking about Iowa being called, one of the things that I was talking about a little bit with that poll being within 3%. And Donald Trump won the state by 8% in 2020 and 9% in 2016. Right now, with 71% of the vote, he is winning by about 14% there. I'm curious if that margin is going to shrink a little bit. Either way, Donald Trump won the state, excuse me. When we're looking at our swing states, Arizona has been so close all night long. Let's see, this is going to take a little bit of a second to update. 50% of the vote counted there. Donald Trump with the lead, 49.7% to 49.5%. Maricopa County, where we know about 60% of the vote is going to be coming from. Kamala Harris with a slight lead there. Arizona is going to be so interesting to watch. We will not have those results tonight. Wisconsin is another place that we are looking at as a swing state. Donald Trump has had a little bit of a lead there with 60% of the vote counted. But again, you look at these uncounted votes and you're still waiting for a good chunk of them to come in Milwaukee. Going over to Georgia real quick, where Trump is doing a little bit better there than some of the other swing states with about 51.1% of the vote. Still a few places where Kamala Harris has a slight lead. 90% of the vote counted so far in Georgia. We're going to get to our congressional districts in a little bit because those have been very tight races. And I'll be back to break all of those down, guys.
All right, thank you, Jenna. We are joined now by Augustana political science professor, Dr. Paul Baumgartner. Doctor, when you look at the presidential race and how it's starting to take shape, what stands out to you tonight?
Well, there are still millions of uncounted ballots across the country. There are some states, especially out west, that have a very slow process for counting ballots. It actually may take several days or several weeks. But the first thing that comes to mind is how well Donald Trump is doing in some of these swing states that he had to do well in. Right now, he is leading in Georgia, he's leading in North Carolina, and he's right on the cusp of several of the other main swing states, such as Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. After 2016, there was a lot of soul searching amongst national pollsters. Did we undercount Donald Trump's support? Did we approach the topic in a manner that just needs to be fundamentally reformed? And I think that if the current trends of the night continue, that similar questions may have to be asked. Because let's be clear, our presidential system is not one that is determined by the national popular vote. It's determined by the Electoral College. And there are going to be presidential elections in which it looks razor thin on the national popular vote side, but actually may end up becoming a blowout on the Electoral College side. I'm not necessarily saying that's what we're seeing, but there's a distinct possibility of that. And we're going to have to think about how to weigh different polls in the future so that races that may actually not be so close, that voters know that ahead of time, and the American public knows that ahead of time.
All right, Professor, thank you. Stick around. We'll check back with you in just a few minutes about some of our local races. We have crews out in the field covering Election Day. They have been out all night covering the area congressional elections, with polls closing in Illinois at 7 and Iowa at 8. Now, early voting was seen in record numbers across the country. So how was voter turnout on Election Day? Drew Coffey joins us live from the Scott County Administrative Building, where ballots are being taken to get counted. And Drew, what are you hearing about voter turnout? Because you were at a polling place all night tonight.
Yeah, I mean, voter turnout at the place we were at, Duck Creek Lodge, was pretty consistent. There was over 850 at that place, and early voting around Scott County ended up being over 130,000. Now we're outside here at the Scott County Administrative Center, and people have pretty much left around 5 minutes ago for the night. We talked to Scott County Auditor Carrie Tompkins, who basically says she expects a preliminary result within the next hour, and she also detailed if there were any issues and kind of the future of counting the ballots for this year's election.
Our election is very secure here in Scott County. Iowa has amazing laws. We are known actually for one of the better states to have very secure election administration laws, which is a great thing. There's a lot of checks and balances. There's a lot of paper trails that go along with everything. So as the results come in tonight for us, we're checking the reports based upon the USB drive. So again, that's just a checks and balance.
And like we mentioned earlier, they released SIM cards from all 66 precincts with the results of each ballot from each machine from those precincts. But also in the future, they also have to count handwritten ballots from select precincts just to make sure the accuracy of those ballot results remain accurate. And moving forward, they expect to have all the results in by later this week. Now we go back to the studio.
All right, thanks, Drew. Let's take a look now at our congressional races, starting with Illinois' 17th district. Democrat incumbent Eric Sorenson taking on Republican Joe McGraw. With just under 70% reporting, you can see Eric Sorenson has that slight lead over Joe McGraw.
Yeah, and we're going to send it over to Jenna, who is going to break down that race for us. Hey, Jenna.
Hey, guys. Yeah, going into tonight, we knew this was going to be a very competitive race. Cook Political Report was calling it one of the more competitive races, but leaning Democratic. We know that Eric Sorenson won it by 4% in 2022. Right now, we're still waiting on results in McLean County, which includes the Bloomington-Normal area. In 2022, about 11% of the voter turnout was from there, and we expect this to give Eric Sorenson some more points. The other place we're still waiting for results from tonight is Mercer County, which will likely go in Joe McGraw's favor. The only thing different on this map so far than what it was in 2022 is that Eric Sorenson right now is leading in McDonough County. There's a little tiny portion of McDonough County that includes Macomb and Western Illinois University. That was one that he lost to Esther Joy King in 2022 by 0.9% of the vote, so very close there. He is performing better there with 67% of the vote counted so far, guys.
All right, thanks, Jenna. Of course, we have been watching Eric Sorenson's watch party with Joe Habersham all night tonight. If you joined us on our News 8 Plus streaming app, Eric was just talking. So, Joe, what are you hearing from him and the campaign?
There you go, Shelby. I was just about to mention, we've had an Eric Sorenson site just moments ago. He took all of us reporters in a hallway and he took a few questions. He says that this night is going kind of how he planned. Now, I do want to mention that in 2020 or following 2020 census, this district, it was redrawn. It's kind of gone a little bit more Democratic favor. Now, he did win in 2022, beating Esther Joy King, but it was by a 4% margin, give or take. Now, he is currently up a little bit more than 4%, so it's interesting to keep that in mind. Now, one of the things we did talk to him about, he's one of the only former meteorologists that are currently in Congress. So he's mentioning, continuing to educate people and to talk to the other side and figure out ways that they can continue to address climate change. And then as we look to the national race, all the screens over here, I mean, they're all tuned into the national race. Everybody's looking at the presidential thing that's going on. Now, he says that if Kamala Harris wins, he'll work with her. If Trump wins, he'll figure out a way to work with him as well. And this is something that, he's going to make sure that no matter what ends up happening tonight and as it continues on for the next couple of days, that he's able to continue to serve the country and the people and, figure out a way to make it work. John and Shelby.
All right, thanks, Joe. And of course, Joe McGraw held his watch party in Rockford tonight. Now, we want to turn our attention to Iowa's 1st district race between incumbent Marionette Miller Meeks and Christina Bohannan. It's a rematch of the 2022 election that Miller Meeks won by 7 points.
Now, this race was listed as a true toss-up by the Cook Political Report, and looking at results, you can see 64% reporting, and those margins are pretty thin, about 20,000 votes separating the two of those. So we're going to send it back to Jenna. What are you seeing when it comes to this race?
Yeah, guys, this has been an interesting race to watch tonight because we really have been seeing it kind of go back and forth, how they're competing against each other. For the first time, we are starting to get some of Scott County's results. Right now, Christina Bohannan, narrow lead there, 51.1% of the vote to Miller Meeks' 48.9% of the vote. This is going to be a very key county. We know of the active active registered voters in this district. The most are in Scott County and Johnson County, which Christina Bohannan will have with that Democratic stronghold there. So it'll be very interesting to see if Scott County is what puts her over the lead over Miller Meeks, or if Miller Meeks will hold on to that tonight. Because again, a third of the registered voters there are not affiliated with the party. So which one is going to win those over, guys?
Yeah, so let's send it over to Riverside, Iowa, where Maddie Franz is at Marionette Miller Meeks' campaign party. Maddie, it seems like it's filling out a little bit compared to some of your previous live hits with us.
Yeah, good evening, John and Shelby. Yeah, it is starting to fill out a bit more, and part of that is because just a few minutes ago, Representative Marionette Miller Meeks walked in the door. There was a lot of applause. Someone shot off some bubbles. A lot of people came up and took pictures with her, chatted with her, gave her some hugs. And yeah, so right now she is not talking to the media, but she did say that she's had a very busy day of some last minute campaigning. She said that she woke up at about 3:45 this morning to go here and there all the way across the district. Now, in the last few minutes, these conversations have been getting louder as we're seeing some of the votes come in, some of the Electoral College stuff nationally. People are pretty closely watching all of these screens in here. Now, like Shelby mentioned, that Cook Political Report analysis is pretty much a toss-up. I mean, it really could go either way, and that's what drew a lot of ad spending into this district. Now, that came from national super PACs on both sides of the aisle. According to Ad Impact, which is an ad analysis company, there are nearly $24 million spent on all of these ads that you've been seeing for months and months and months, and especially ramping up in the last few weeks. We've seen a lot of ads from both sides. So we'll know in just a few minutes when Marionette Miller Meeks goes up on stage, and we'll be able to bring that to you as soon as we hear that.
All right, Maddie, very good. Thank you. We'll send it over now to Iowa City, where Harrison Belsanti has been with the Christina Bohannan party all night. Harrison, a lot of energy there, it seems like, throughout the night. How is it now as we get some of these early numbers?
Hey, John. It's still pretty packed in here, as you guys can see. A little bit less traffic, not as many people walking in front of the camera as before, but yeah, still pretty rowdy. We're definitely still waiting for Christina to come make an appearance here. About 200 supporters or so, all waiting here for Christina to come out and address what's been going on with this election and see what she has to say about everything. For many, Bohannan's pro-abortion approach to abortion is enough to make them vote blue in this race. We'll continue to bring you more updates on this race as they're made available, but for now, we'll go ahead and send things back to you guys in the studio.
All right, Harrison, thank you. Okay, coming up, it was a rainy election day, but a seasonally dry spell is on the way. How long could that last?
Well, Morgan will have more with Look at Your Weather coming up later on News 8 at 10.
Counted in Milwaukee. So the Republicans in Wisconsin are saying Donald Trump's going to have about a 21 to 24,000 vote lead before those 31,000 votes get counted. So this is going to be very, very close. And if you look at Racine and Kenosha County down in the southeast corner, you'll see that those two counties together, if you go up one north in Racine, there's only 23% in. But that's a huge, those are some huge numbers where they need to be.
So let's just drill down on that, Ryan. What are your sources telling you? Where does Donald Trump need to be before these final votes in some of these Democrat-rich counties?
Right. People believe, and I was just talking to Governor Walker on text about this, and he agrees that Donald Trump needs to have about a 21,000 vote lead before those 31,000 absentee ballots get counted or entered into the system in Milwaukee that are still sitting out there. So it's, he's got a 41,000, Trump's got a 41,000 vote lead right now. There's more to come, and there's more blue votes to come in as well. So a long way to go, but rather be Donald Trump here than Kamala Harris.
In Wisconsin. Say that again, Donna?
I would rather be Kamala Harris. Look,
You know the state better than I know it, but I also know how difficult it is to get all of the votes counted in Milwaukee. And also Dane. I mean, Dane had not only a significant early vote, but also a great turnout today with the same-day registration, as well as some of the young people in line. So I still believe the verdict is still out. We may not know Milwaukee, the final verdict until sometime tomorrow morning.
Could be
It's too
right.
early.
You could be right.
Well, you owe me a beer.
I don't think you're going to be right, but you could be. I'm not saying
I'll
it's
take
over.
Milwaukee best.
I mean,
I'd rather be where we're at.
Spotted cow. But Dane County, they've already counted 94% of the vote. And she seems to have fallen short. That's a...
John, these are razor-thin margin.
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
come on, let's not try
let's
to
look at
win
the,
by a blowout. I mean, she's getting there.
But let's look at the map that shows the outstanding vote, Rick.
Yeah,
by party here.
Yeah, I mean that's Milwaukee. That's exactly what Reince is talking about. It's a huge amount of vote that is Milwaukee. That's why 43,000 is not necessarily a safe lead. Madison, a little bit of a smaller dot, but there's some red spots on the map as well. You go out to the west to St. Croix. I mean, we don't really have any vote there to speak of at all. So there's still Republican votes too, but. Reince is right. I mean, as with all three of these Midwestern cities, we're not really going to know until we have a complete portrait of what's going on inside Philadelphia, where there's still...
You're watching election night coverage on WQAD News 8.
Welcome back to our election night coverage.
Yeah, millions of votes are still being counted across the country, with polls in just Hawaii and Alaska still open right now. Let's take a look right now at how the balance of power is shaping up in Congress. Now, in the House of Representatives, the race to 218 is well underway currently. You can see right now, Republicans have secured 161 seats, Democrats 111 seats, but 435 total there, of course.
And over in the Senate, Republicans came in tonight with a 38-28 advantage. As of right now, that race to 100, Republicans still have that advantage, just a few seats away from a majority. Democrats looking to gain some more at 39 right now.
Yeah, and of course we want to bring back Augustana political science professor, Dr. Paul Baumgartner. Professor, we still have several races left to decide this balance of power, but this is something that we have been talking about throughout the night. It is going to have a huge impact for whomever is the next president of the United States.
It absolutely is. A presidential candidate will go on the campaign trail and they will make a laundry list of promises, things that they want to accomplish. And wouldn't you know, so many of them require legislative assistance, right? Because lawmakers are the ones that make the laws. Now, there are Article 2 powers that are gifted to the President of the United States. There are things that the president can do on their own authority. However, a lot of those landmark programs, big federal programs, big pieces of legislation that we've seen across American history that have changed lives have come because the President of the United States is working alongside the House and also the Senate. So right now, Kamala Harris wants a unified government that's unified Democratic, and Donald Trump wants unified government that is unified and Republican.
Does it change the mood at all for whoever the victor is, depending on how close these margins are? If you have a very tight race in both parties of Congress, I mean, what does that tee up for the victor?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm reminded of the 2020 election cycle, and Democrats were quite excited because Joe Biden had beat the incumbent, Donald Trump. However, if you looked at the composition of the Senate, it was 50-50, right? So technically unified government. The Democrats controlled the White House, they controlled the House of Reps. But because it was 50-50 in the Senate, you saw a lot of concessions that had to be made, right? So more right-leaning or centrist Democratic senators like Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema, oftentimes the Biden administration had to make deals with them, right? They had to try to build consensus when the Senate was that closely divided. Now, right now, it looks like many Republican candidates in the Senate are doing quite well. I think that this is where the RNC was most optimistic. They thought that they had a higher likelihood of winning the Senate than even winning the White House or the House of Representatives. There's still a lot of ballots to be counted, but as of now, I think the Republicans are still quite rosy about their chances in the Senate.
All right, Professor, thank you for that insight. Stick around. We've been talking a lot about elections in this newscast. It's not the only thing we're going to be talking about. I'm going to send it over to Morgan to talk about weather.
Yeah, and we are finally going to see some drier skies and some sunshine as we head into tomorrow. Also seasonable, but we'll talk about why temperatures are going to stay a little more above normal over the next couple of days. That's all coming up next in your accurate forecast.
Vote and how it broke down and whether or not the gender gap bears out that we've reported on, John.
And Trump had a huge rally in State College in these closing days. It was one of his biggest of the final rallies. A lot of college students turning out, waiting in line for a long time, sitting through a long rally. Really quite a story.
And you have some exit polls on the youth vote in Pennsylvania. What are you seeing?
Yes, Donald Trump actually doing 8 points better with the group 18 to 29 than he did when he was in 2020. But Kamala Harris is winning. It's still just that he's doing better than he did. 53% of the vote, a little more than half, going for Kamala Harris. And this is a group that certainly she has gone after. She has talked about how Gen Z is impatient for change. The baton is in our hands. She's talked multiple times about a new way forward. We're seeing more of the same in Wisconsin, where she's edging him out, but still he's doing much better than he did in 2020. Here she has half of that youth vote in Wisconsin for that 18 to 29, but Donald Trump's still outperforming himself from 2020.
Wow, it's really interesting because when I was over looking at Wisconsin with you, we were looking at Madison, and I was wondering if the youth vote and the gender gap is going to become a story in some of these key counties. And when you see Lindsay saying that Kamala Harris eking out by 2 points in the exit polls among young voters, and what is the benchmark of where she should be in Dane County? I mean, obviously she's beating him there, but
a full point behind, and that's exactly it. And it's not just the percentages; it's often going to be turnout as well. And this is a county that Biden was able to get, I think, around 180,000 votes out of it. I talked to someone, a Wisconsin specialist, who said that's what you need for years now. Reince knows this better than anyone. Democrats have been running up the score in Madison, the liberal college town, and said got as much as they can, and maybe they reached a limit tonight.
I think it's really interesting. Thanks, Rick. We're going to stay on this. We're going to be laser focused on Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, which we sound like a broken record. We say this every 4 years or so. And I think it's interesting that both Reince and Donna believe that this is going to be very close, particularly in a state like Wisconsin. And, Reince is from there, so he knows Wisconsin better than any of us. So the numbers continue to come in. We'll be right back. Your local news. We're going to check in with your local news teams, and we'll see you a short time from now. Our live coverage of Election Night 2024 in a moment.
David Muir, ABC's World News Tonight, the most watched newscast in America, and honored with the Emmy Award, winner for Outstanding Live News Program. More Americans watch World News Tonight with David Muir than any other newscast. Right now, votes are being counted, and tomorrow, GMA is right there with the morning's first news and
breaking developments from our powerhouse political team.
Tomorrow morning,
when the story matters most,
a special edition of Good Morning America with the election coverage you need.
Welcome back to News 8 at 10. Of course, it has been a busy election day, but we want to take a moment to appreciate this photo sent by Leanna. And we had rain throughout the day, but in the end, a double rainbow over the American flag. Thanks to Leanna for sending this in. I've seen a lot of photos of that beautiful double rainbow. Again, now we are seeing those skies begin to dry out. It's been a gloomy stretch of weather, but we are looking forward to finally getting some good sunshine as we head into the next couple of days. Right now in Moline, sitting at 54 degrees, so it's still pretty nice out there. We are starting to see that cold front begin to work through the area, so you can still see we're fairly warm right now. Princeton still sitting around 60 degrees, but pointing out to our west near Des Moines, Marshalltown, dropping down to the mid 40s. So again, that cooler air mass starting to usher in behind this cold front, and that's going to start to bring in those more seasonable temperatures for us, especially as we head into tonight and tomorrow. And again, those clear skies are starting to settle in for a lot of the upper Midwest. So again, after this really gloomy stretch of weather, it's going to be nice to at least get some sunshine. Temperatures tonight will be in the low 40s. So again, a little bit cooler now that we are seeing those clearer conditions. Tomorrow, we're expected to see, again, quite a bit of sunshine. Highs are going to be more seasonable in the mid 50s for us, and still expected to see some sunshine. Thursday, we could get a little bit warmer, nearing 60 degrees, but again, expected to be a fairly dry day again on Thursday, and should see some more sunshine for us. And the reason why we're going to continue to keep temperatures maybe leaning more towards on the above normal side is because we're tracking the tropics. We actually have a Hurricane Rafael right now in the tropics, and that's actually expected to go over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Still expected to keep hurricane status, but once it gets closer to the coastline of Texas, Louisiana, actually expected to drop down to a tropical storm status before making landfall by this weekend. That is something we're going to keep a close eye out on, but we know when the tropics are active, we tend to see temperatures trending a little warmer for us, and we'll talk about that coming up in 30 seconds.
Rhythm City Casino in Davenport, Iowa welcomes Chris Jansen to the Event Center stage on Friday, January 24th at 8 p.m. Enjoy country chart toppers Buy Me a Boat.
Well, you can buy me a boat.
Good vibes. And All I Need Is You. Purchase your tickets in person or at the market starting at just $45. Get yours at the market or at rhythmcitycasino.com.
All right, looking at the next 8 days, again, we stay just slightly above normal. Our average highs for this time of year in the mid 50s, and that's heading into the weekend. Next chance of rain does come in for Saturday, but right now those rain amounts are trending more on the light side. Again, we see fairly nice temperatures, at least for the next week, before we start to drop down to, I guess, more seasonal temperatures by the time we get to the second week of the 14-day tracker, but still a lot of dry time in the 14 days. So again, it was really nice to see the rain, but starting to finally see a little bit more dry time for us. Looking at our 3-degree guarantee, forecasted high for today was 68 degrees. Actual hit the mid 60s. So again, a nice warm day, but adding $20 to that jackpot, guys.
Still perfect, Morgan. Thank you.
All right, still ahead, we take a look at a few other races of note from around our area.
As well as break down some other items of note you saw on your ballot. Coming up next.
And we'll keep checking in with you there in Mar-a-Lago. Now to the Harris headquarters at Howard University. Eva Pilgrim is there. Eva, let's talk about the atmosphere there.
Well, Kira, I can tell you there has been a real vibe shift here in the last 30 minutes to 45 minutes or so. We're actually starting to see some people that are leaving. There have been streams of people going. The crowd has thinned out just a little bit. You know, we've spoken with campaign sources who they tell us that they think that they can still hold the blue wall. But when we talk to people within the Democratic Party, there's a real concern that's starting to build as they look at the margins in these blue wall states, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Michigan. There's nerves, a lot of nerves tonight about the numbers that they're seeing coming in and just how she's performing versus how Joe Biden did 4 years ago. One of the things the Harris campaign keeps sending us is information about the long lines at college campuses. And one source said to me, we can't count on those votes for Harris. Kira.
All right, Eva Pilgrim, thank you so much. I'm Kira Phillips. So glad that you are with us tonight. I hope you'll stay with ABC News. Our team is bringing you election results all throughout the night, led by our David Muir. Don't go far. Our race for the White House coverage continues.
America's #1 news, ABC News, now streaming 24/7 on Disney+.
You're watching election night coverage on WQAD News 8.
Welcome back. We want to take a look at some other key races from around the area, as well as a few other ballot items. So in the race for Scott County Sheriff, you can see there all precincts are reporting, and Tim Lane, the incumbent, has won for Scott County Sheriff.
And here are the latest results in the race for the Scott County Board of Supervisors. A number of candidates there you see running, but you see the top three there at the top of your screen with 100% of the precincts reporting. And there were two constitutional amendments on the ballot in Iowa. The first asked whether 17-year-olds who will be 18 by the general election should be eligible to vote in the primary. That one, 76% of folks voted yes.
And the other amendment on the ballot dealt with the transfer of power for governor, placing the lieutenant governor in place of the governor if there ever was a temporary disability. You can see by a wide margin that is going to pass in Iowa. There were also 3 advisory questions on the Illinois ballot. These questions are not legally binding. They only serve to advise legislators on potential policy decisions in the next legislative session. The one on election interference, you can see, is going to pass by a wide margin there.
All right, we will be right back.
Joe Biden got knocked down to about 67. Harris is below that right now with about 60% of the vote in. Pima County, that's kind of the Democratic base of the state. We're seeing Kamala Harris run a little bit above her 538 benchmark. And it's a little bit intriguing to think about. We talk about how the blue wall is now the main strategy for Harris with things looking good for Trump in the South. There is a bit of a backup plan. If Harris were able to win Arizona and Nevada, it could potentially trade off a loss in Wisconsin and Michigan. Nothing trades off a loss in Pennsylvania, but Wisconsin and Michigan could be offset with a win through those 2 western states if we get to that point of the night.
Okay, we got about 45 seconds before we have to take a break. Let's look at Pennsylvania. Where do things stand real quick?
Yeah, Pennsylvania, we've got almost a 200,000 vote margin between the two of them with about 77% of the vote in. Keying in on Philadelphia, still 250,000 votes there in a city that's going 3-1, and still a lot of votes left, 95,000 in Delco, 228,000 in Montgomery. Bucks County, which is a little more evenly split, 200,000 additional votes. Chester County, 182. Out in Pittsburgh, to check in, about 57,000 votes. So we do have areas that the Democrats can still pick up, but that looms large. We're talking about 3.5 percentage points and 188,000 votes that have to be made up in the remaining vote in these places.
It's a tall order. Rick Klein over at the big board. Rick, thank you. When we come back, we'll be joined by the rest of the country. Our live coverage of the 2024 election returns here in just a moment. Right back to the battleground states.
Attention all units. Possible elder abduction in progress.
Thursday.
Suspect is on the roof, requesting backup.
2 daring rescues.
My little brother's trapped.
He's about 20 feet down.
I'm scared.
1 new hero.
Someone's got to go down there.
I don't think you're gonna fit this time.
There's someone who can.
I can do it. I'm his big brother.
If we don't try this, we might not get to him in time.
Jack!
911 returns Thursday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us here on WQAD News 8 at 10. Some news that we didn't get to tell you earlier. We do know that in Scott County, Iowa, Democrat Monica Kurth for the Iowa House of Representatives has beaten Nathan Ramker, the Republican, by, get this, 47 votes. That is with all of the votes tallied. As far as we can tell, that's the closest race so far in our area.
Yeah, and as we look at the national map, we can tell you that within just the past few moments, North Carolina has been called for former President Donald Trump, and Republicans have secured now 49 seats in the Senate. That puts them 2 seats away from a majority. That's something we've been talking about all night tonight, both for the Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives, but a lot more races that we still don't have results for. But that'll do it for our coverage here tonight on the air. We're going to stay on on the WQAD 8+ app. So if you want to switch over to that now, we'll continue our coverage because there are still local races that we are watching tonight.
Thank you for joining us.
We're back now with our live coverage of the 2024 election. We want to welcome back our viewers in the rest of the country joining us for coverage across the country again at this hour. And we have another state to call, Connecticut. Vice President Kamala Harris picks up the 7 electoral votes in Connecticut. We'll take you out to Minnesota. We have a Senate race to call. Senator Amy Klobuchar, she was seeking a 4th term, very popular in her state. She's been projected the winner at this hour. She returns to the Senate for a 4th term. Big shakeup in Ohio tonight. We reported on this earlier in the evening. It was going in this direction, and Republican challenger Bernie Moreno, a businessman, Colombian-born, would be one of the wealthiest senators, and now he is. He has beaten Sherrod Brown. This was one of the most expensive congressional races in history. Sherrod Brown held on even as the tide turned in his state, became a red state. But tonight, Sherrod Brown has been defeated. Bernie Moreno becomes the next senator from Ohio. And Rachel, you're over at the board. This is a pickup.
This is a huge shakeup now, especially for Democrats and any hope that they have to sort of hang on to the majority in the Senate. Sherrod Brown faced a huge challenge of trying to build back the Democratic coalition. He didn't perform as well in counties just outside of Youngstown. This is Trumbull County. You could see he underperformed here. This is also another one where Donald Trump won. Sherrod Brown won this county, Wood County, back in 2018, not performing as well here either. Bernie Moreno was Donald Trump's choice in the primary. This now means that Donald Trump has handpicked 2 of the Ohio state senators, of course, the other one being Senator J.D. Vance, his running mate.
All right, Rachel, thanks. We do have a state to call, and this is a big one. It's North Carolina, 16 electoral votes go to former President Donald Trump.
You're watching election night coverage on WQAD News 8.
All right, thanks for joining us on the WQAD 8+ app. I'm John Diaz.
And I'm Shelby Kluver. We're going to take you right to the latest on the presidential race. Just minutes ago, ABC News calling Iowa for former President Trump, of course, also North Carolina as well. You may remember a poll that was released just a few days ago that showed Harris with a slight lead in Iowa.
And earlier tonight, Illinois was called for Kamala Harris. So we're going to send it over to Jenna Webster, who's in studio tracking the race to 270. Jenna, what are some of the latest numbers and states that you've seen perhaps called?
Yeah, so besides North Carolina being called for Trump, the other thing that happened towards the end of our 10 o'clock newscast was that New Mexico was called for Kamala Harris, bringing her up to 192 electoral college votes. Donald Trump, 230. He's 40 away from that race to 270 right now. Arizona has still been a very interesting state to watch. And again, we're not going to know those results tonight. Let me give it a second to update here to refresh. If this is, this is still showing that Donald Trump is up 49.7%. I don't think this is refreshed because that was the exact same that it was about 35 minutes ago. Still, we don't have any data for here in Nevada, Alaska, Hawaii. Still where we don't have our results. We were talking a little bit about Iowa a couple minutes ago. Shelby, you mentioned that Des Moines Register poll with 71% of the votes counted. It has right now obviously been called for Donald Trump, and it's going to stay for Donald Trump with his 55.9% to 42.7%. I'm interested to see if that margin closes a little bit. Here in Scott County right now, Donald Trump with 83% of the votes counted there is winning by 51.2%. That might be a little bit different in Iowa's 1st district, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later, along with our 17th district, guys.
All right, Jenna, thank you.
We are joined now by Augustana political science professor, Dr. Paul Baumgartner. Professor, I've seen a lot of chatter online. This is a historical phenomenon where we see rural precincts get their results in faster than urban precincts tend to do. How does that set the mood when we go into election night like this, where the margins are so razor thin and a state looks all red or all blue?
Yes, sometimes this can be a challenge for the candidate or the party that's depending on those votes that will be coming in later, right? They caution the voters, they caution the media, just wait, just wait. And oftentimes you'll see that the candidate or the party that is oftentimes in the lead at the very beginning because of quicker votes, right, will kind of champion how well they're doing, right? And in recent years, maybe even say that any change in their fortunes as the days move on may be evidence of election fraud. But you're right, the sequencing of votes when they're counted oftentimes matters when it comes to setting expectations, both within your campaign, but also for voters that really want to know, did my candidate win? Did my party win?
I know a lot of folks are watching this very closely, perhaps nervously. They'd like to get an answer to who's going to be the next president tonight. But you talked about how some of the counting actually takes longer in some of the western states. Without making maybe predictions that are out of line, I mean, do you see us having a decision within the next few hours, or is this going to be later on this week when we will sort of know?
So there are pathways to victory for both candidates that don't require some of the more slow-moving states, shall we say. So if we find out in the next few hours, or if we find out in the next day or two that a candidate has won the blue wall, right, has won Pennsylvania, they've won Wisconsin, they've won Michigan, then maybe we're not waiting on bated breath for what's going on in Nevada, which comparatively has fewer electoral votes than a state like Pennsylvania does. So if it is neck and neck after Georgia is called, after the blue wall is called, then we will be turning and waiting for slower states to move. Now, where I think this is actually going to be even more time consuming and slower is when it comes to the House and trying to understand who's controlling the House and by what margin, right? So I will say that the Democratic Party was fairly bullish coming into tonight that they would take the House, right? Currently, the House of Representatives is controlled by the Republican Party. The Democrats believe that they would have a pretty good chance of winning it back. We're going to have to wait and see, because some of those slow-moving states are going to be giving us the difference between one party in control, another party in control, and by what margin. Is it a slim margin? Is it a super majority such that that party has a lot of power and control in DC? In the House, I think, is where we're really going to have to wait a bit.
Well, Paul, we talked about this earlier in the night, but for people that are just joining us, can you refresh us on some of the comparisons that are maybe fair to make versus some that are we should stay away from when it comes to comparing to previous elections in 2020 and 2016?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we're dealing with different candidates on the Democratic side. Hillary Clinton in 2016, Joe Biden in 2020, Kamala Harris in 2024. Each of them put forward their own campaigns and thought that they could beat Donald Trump in a different way, right? So obviously there's a difference there. The Republican candidate has stayed the same, right? Donald Trump has been the Republican nominee from 2016 all the way up to 2024. This is the first time this has happened in American presidential politics until you go back and look at the FDR period of time, right? But there are meaningful differences. I should also note that the kinds of votes and the kinds of voters that the campaigns are trying to get, who they're trying to mobilize, looks different than 8 years ago. Now, a conversation we had earlier in the night pertained to split ticket voting, right? There was a hope, especially in the late stages of the race, that the Harris campaign had, that maybe they can make inroads with disillusioned Republicans, right? Those that see Donald Trump as unfit. And there were also hopes by the Trump campaign that they would be able to tap into the Latino voter base or Black voters in a way that previous Republican candidates for president had not been able to. So we have seen some meaningful changes.
Obviously, Professor, the race not over here, but just maybe a hypothetical question for you. When you get back into your class, you're talking with your students, what are you talking to them about? And perhaps what are the questions they're going to be asking you, whether it's next week when you get back in class or 10 years from now, if you're still doing this and you're thinking back to this particular election?
That's a good question. So one thing that we talk about a lot when we study the American presidency is how to mark political time, right? that this epoch was dominated by this figure or this movement, and this epoch had a completely different set of priorities, and the ideas that dominated then were just completely different than the epoch that came before or that which came after. I think that if Donald Trump is able to win the 2024 election, students are going to view him and his movement in kind of a legacy-defining way or an era-defining way. Let's be clear. This is an individual who lost the 2020 presidential election and still maintained a very strong grip over the Republican Party. We have not seen a president ascend to the White House, lose, and then come back to the White House for 140 years. Grover Cleveland did it. The fact that Donald Trump has been a mainstay of American politics and has completely remade the Republican Party is something that students talk about, and they want to better understand how this happened, what it means for the future, what kind of bills that we will see coming from the House and the Senate in the years to come. But once again, the night is young. Donald Trump could lose. And if he does lose, then we'll think of Trumpism as having a different role within the 21st century of American politics.
All right, Professor, we so much appreciate all of your insight over the course of this evening. You shine a light on everything to kind of make it clear for not only us here in the studio, but I imagine our viewers as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, have a good night.
You too. All right, we have crews out in the field covering Election Day, of course, and they have been out all night covering area congressional elections with polls closing at this point several hours ago.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a look now at our congressional races, starting with Illinois' 17th district. Democrat incumbent Eric Sorenson taking on Republican Joe McGraw. You can see there about 70% of that vote has been recorded, and a pretty sizable lead there, just over 15,000 votes for Eric Sorenson.
And we're going to send it over to Jenna Webster to break down that race for us. Hey, Jenna.
Hey, guys. Yeah, you remember Eric Sorenson won this district by 4% of the vote back in 2022. Shelby, you were covering that race that night, and we didn't have answers as we closed out the night there. The interesting thing was that Sherry Bustos also, when she won this district in 2020, won it by 4% of the vote. The district was redrawn between 2020 and 2022 in a Democrat's favor. So I was wondering if Eric Sorenson might perform a little bit better here tonight, which as of now he is. We've got these Democratic counties where he is right now with about 68% of the vote counted. He's doing about 5 points better in all of those counties so far, including McDonough County, which was one that he lost. Eric Sorenson lost to Esther Joy King by 0.9% of the vote back in 2022. Joe McGraw, on the other hand, he's performing significantly better in Knox County than Esther Joy King did there. Eric Sorenson performing a little bit worse right now. That was +8 for the Republicans last time. Rock Island County has been a little bit not as much of a 5-point advantage. Eric Sorenson only won that by about 11 points last time. It's still a significant amount. When you're looking at where we're still waiting for those uncounted votes, you've got McLean County and Bloomington Normal, which is a county that Eric Sorenson did very well in last time. And again, in Mercer County, which we expect to go probably towards Joe McGraw, but a smaller percent of the vote total there. So that's kind of where the 17th is looking at right now as we go into the 11 o'clock hour, guys.
All right, thank you, Jenna. Joe Haberstam is live tonight at Eric Sorenson's watch party in Moline, right down the street from our station. Joe, what are you hearing from the campaign?
Well, right now we're waiting for the campaign to give us a little something. I think there is a chance that we may hear a speech one way or another within the next hour or so. But like Jenna said, we're getting a decent portion of these votes that are coming in right now. And it's really funny because as you look around, I mean, I know that you guys won't be able to see it, but all of these TVs are turned into like national networks and they're watching the presidential race. Sorenson, he's tucked away in a room and he's like, look, I'm tuned in to what, my race. I'm not really paying attention to the Trump and Kamala race that's going on right now. And it's really funny because, like I said, there are supporters here who have almost like turned away from the Sorenson race. They think it's basically a done deal. From the people that I've talked to, they're more or less worried about the fact that Trump is up on Kamala, and that's something that we'll have to keep up with for the next couple of days. But right now, we're just waiting for the campaign to give us the next couple of steps. But yeah, that's about all that we have right now for you, Shelby and John.
All right, Joe, thank you. And of course, Joe McGraw held his watch party in Rockford tonight. He's running against incumbent Eric Sorenson.
We turn now to the Iowa 1st District race between incumbent Marionette Miller Meeks and Christina Bohannan, a rematch of the 2022 election that Miller Meeks won by 7 points.
Now, this race was listed as a true toss-up by the Cook Political Report. And looking at the results there, a close one, 51%. Bohannan with the advantage, but really 5,300 votes is what separates these two candidates right now, with 87% of those precincts reporting.
So when we're looking at these races, we turn to Jenna Webster. What do you got for us, Jenna?
Yeah, so I want to start real quick with actually the Iowa presidential map, because one of the things I pointed out earlier was that in Scott County, Donald Trump is leading with 87% of the vote counted there. He's leading 51.2% to Kamala Harris's 47.3%. When you look at the 1st district, Christina Bohannan, the Democrat, is leading in Scott County. She has 51.1% of the vote versus Marionette Miller Meeks 48.9% of the vote. This is going to be a very key county. We've talked about when you look at the active voter registration in the Iowa 1st Congressional District, your number 1 and 2 counties are Davenport and Johnson County. Johnson County, very much a Democratic stronghold there. She is performing very well, Christina Bohannan, with 70% of the vote, with 86% of it counted. So we're going to have to keep watching as more of the results come in Scott County, if that can help Christina Bohannan keep her lead, or if it's going to go in Marionette Miller Meeks' favor, because we're still waiting on results from Muscatine County and Washington County, and again out here in Jasper County, all counties that Marionette Miller Meeks won back in 2022. Our one, if you've heard me talk about Jefferson County that I am so fascinated by, it is kind of our one rural purple district. Marionette Miller Meeks won it by 1.1 points in the last race, but she lost it by 1.7. Right now, Christina Bohannan is leading there 51.4% to Miller Meeks' 48.6%. Now, that's a much smaller voter population than you're going to get in some place like Scott County. Very, very close race heading into tonight, guys.
All right, Jenna, thank you. Let's send it live outside to Riverside, Iowa, where Maddie Franz is at Marionette Miller Meeks' campaign party. Maddie, what are you seeing late tonight?
Hey, good evening, John. Just in the last maybe 30 seconds, Fox News, where they have the volume on over here, predicted Republican control of the Senate. So we did hear a big applause for that. And, you know, we did watch as those votes that are counted flip in Bohannan's favor. Now, at that, we didn't see too much of a reaction, but, you know, it's just a reminder of how truly close this race is. Now, in the last half hour, 45 minutes, Marionette Miller Meeks walked in. There was a big applause. Someone shut off some bubbles. Everyone was rushing up to get some pictures and shake her hand and talk to her. Now, she is not going to answer any questions until a little bit later in the night, but I do know that she had a very, very busy day doing some last-minute campaigning. She went all the way across the district. She was in Fairfield, and then she was all the way over other side of the district, really. And you know, we're still waiting to hear a speech from her. She has left the room. She's been in the back for a few minutes now, but we're hoping to hear a speech from her sometime tonight. And yeah, the room is pretty much filled out now. I think this is where it's going to be at for the rest of the night. But, you know, conversations have been getting louder and louder as the night has gone on, and everyone's eyes are glued to those big races, John.
Yeah, understandable, Maddie. Thank you. Let's head over to Iowa City, where Harrison Belsanti has been with Christina Bohannan's camp all night. Harrison, what's the atmosphere there like with this race still very, very tight?
Hey guys, yeah, we're still in Iowa City at Christina Bohannan's election party, monitoring this neck-and-neck race for Iowa's 1st Congressional District, like you guys said. The campaign and Bohannan still haven't shown face yet here, and for many, Bohannan's pro-abortion approach to abortion is enough to make them vote blue this time around in this vote. About 200 or so supporters have been here for over 2 hours now along with us, and there's no end in sight until they get the answer they're looking for from this election. We'll continue to bring you guys updates on this race as they're made available and let you guys know if Christina does make an appearance here. But for now, we'll go ahead and send things back to you guys.
All right, thank you so much, Harrison.
Let's look right now at how the balance of power is shaping up. You heard Maddie talk about this a little bit, but you can see 170 seats for Republicans, 124 for Democrats. I think at last check that was a +1 change for Republicans, at least so far in this race. And in the Senate, I don't know if we can pull that one up. There it is. It looks like Republicans have secured at least 50% of the seats in the Senate. They would need one more in order to have that majority.
We want to thank you all for joining us on the WQAD News 8 Plus app streaming on this election night. We will continue to follow our local races throughout the night.
And of course, we want to thank Professor Paul Baumgartner for joining us to break down this election all night long. Our next newscast is tomorrow morning. Good Morning Quad Cities at 4:30.
And for all of tonight's election results, text VOTE to 309-304-0888, and that'll take you straight to our elections result page on our website.